Chapter 166. For the entire morning, Zhang Xiaohua spent his time in the herbal field. After the rain, the field was rather muddy and it was very strenuous to work. Furthermore, the weeds in the herbal field were growing crazily. Zhang Xiaohua was so busy that he could not help but wonder why the weeds that he had seen a few days ago had suddenly grown so much today. By the time he finished his work, it was already close to noon. The sun was high up in the sky, but the ground was still wet and slippery. Zhang Xiaohua did not have a suitable place to practice martial arts, so he could only sit in the straw hut and practice the Carefree Heart Sutra. The cool strands of qi flowed through Zhang Xiaohua's meridians, making him feel very comfortable. When dusk fell, Zhang Xiaohua walked out of the straw hut. After a day of exposure to the sun, some parts of the ground were already dry. Zhang Xiaohua could not wait to practice the Big Dipper mystical fist to loosen up his muscles and bones. In fact, people had a habit of doing certain things. If they did not do it for a day, they would feel empty in their hearts and would not be able to adapt. At this moment, Zhang Xiaohua was like that. It was not bad to say that he was diligent, but practicing martial arts every day had already become a habit. If he did not practice for a day, his bones would probably itch. The clean land beside the straw hut was not too big, but it was enough for Zhang Xiaohua to practice his martial arts. After practicing the Big Dipper mystical fist a few times, Zhang Xiaohua realized that he had advanced. The Big Dipper mystical fist had actually entered the 3rd level. When he practiced it for the 7th time, a cool flow appeared, tempering his bones. Furthermore, Zhang Xiaohua could clearly feel that the cool flow was not the same as the cool qi in his meridians. However, he could not pinpoint the exact difference. In just a few days, the Big Dipper mystical fist was able to level up. This made Xiaohua very happy, but when he thought about it carefully, he realized that he had no idea how to level it up. Even Xiaohua himself was at a loss. All he could do was blindly practice his fist technique and look forward to the next level up. In the next few days, Zhang Xiaohua's life returned to normal. The weeds in the herbal field slowly decreased. He Tianshu didn't disturb Zhang Xiaohua either. He must be immersed in comprehending the ethereal steps. As for Zhang Xiaohua's footwork, after practicing in the forest for the next few days, she had already converted the theory in her mind into the reality of her feet. She had completely grasped the 2nd level of the ethereal steps. However, when she was comprehending it, there were some discrepancies with what was recorded in the secret manual. And when she practiced, there were even more discrepancies. However, it was still roughly similar to what was recorded in the manual. Other than continuously comprehending the footwork, Zhang Xiaohua really didn't have much to prepare. He had practiced the Big Dipper mystical fist countless times. The moves were all engraved in his mind. Ever since he returned to the Huanxi Manor, although he had not sparred with anyone, he was still very confident that he would not be at a disadvantage in terms of fist techniques. As for the sword in old Professor Yu's left hand, he was still practicing. He liked the feeling of the warm flow flowing through his left arm. However, he also knew that no matter how much he practiced this sword move, it would not be able to be used in the martial arts competition. Therefore, he could only use the Big Dipper mystical fist. After learning the footwork of the ethereal steps, Zhang Xiaohua also tried to combine the Big Dipper mystical fist with the ethereal steps. However, after practicing alone for a while, he realized that the ethereal steps was just a type of footwork. One could practice it alone, and even use it in a competition. However, if one practiced the footwork and the fist technique at the same time, it would be very uncoordinated. It was as if one had to twist two different things together. Zhang Xiaohua gave it a try and gave up. Therefore, every day, other than practicing the Big Dipper mystical fist, Zhang Xiaohua put all his energy into the cultivation of the Carefree Heart Sutra. After a few days of cultivation, the inner energy in Zhang Xiaohua's meridians was still as thin as silk. There was no obvious growth. When he drew in the Yuan Qi into his body, the Yuan Qi was still nowhere to be seen. However, Zhang Xiaohua was not worried. He probably knew that the Yuan Qi he was drawing in was too thin. He could not feel it once it entered his body. The inner energy that flowed in his body without any sluggishness was probably because it was constantly drawing in the invisible yuan qi. However, the growth of his cultivation was too slow. He really did not know when he would be able to reach the second level of the Heart Sutra. Zhang Xiaohua, who was in the midst of cultivation, would occasionally lose his anchor. He could not help but smack his lips and shake his head helplessly. After more than 10 days, He Tianshu still did not appear. Zhang Xiaohua, who was quietly cultivating, started to feel anxious. Could it be that He Tianshu had not fully comprehended the ethereal steps? However, he immediately thought of a problem. Why was he waiting for He Tianshu? Did he want him to teach him the second level of the ethereal steps? But he had already learned the second level of the ethereal steps. Did he still need him to teach him? When Zhang Xiaohua thought of this, he could not help but cover his forehead with his hand and frown deeply. He was used to relying on others and had fallen into a vicious cycle of thinking. Even if he had already learned a martial art, he still needed to consult others to confirm if he had learned it correctly. To put it bluntly, it was to obtain the affirmation of others and give himself an affirmation in his heart. Seeing others say that he had learned it correctly, he should not doubt himself anymore. This kind of method had a certain degree of accuracy. There was a saying, when 3 people walk together, there is always one who can learn from me. One could learn from others' strong points to make up for one's weak points. But in terms of the ethereal steps, this was also the first time He Tianshu had learned it. He was also in the stage of comprehending it. Furthermore, the things he had comprehended were already different from the records in the secret manual. If He Tianshu's teaching was different from his own comprehension, then where should he go from here? Hence, Zhang Xiaohua had no choice but to stop the cultivation of the Heart Sutra and begin to consider this problem. Fortunately, it did not take long before his frown relaxed. In fact, it was simple. Even if He Tianshu were to teach Zhang Xiaohua the ethereal steps, Zhang Xiaohua himself would not change what he had already comprehended. Just like the fist of the North Star, many of the moves were already different from the ones circulating in the pugilistic world. He would not change his habits and change what belonged to him just because of imitating. Furthermore, Zhang Xiaohua also knew deeply that there was one thing he was very sure of. The fist of the North Star had the effect of tempering the bones. Did other fist techniques have the same effect? If he only pursued learning, would he be in such a situation? There was originally no path in the world. When many people walked on it, there would be a path. Perhaps on other people's path, there would be many people walking on it, and there would be no path in front of him. But when he walked forward, there would be a path. Perhaps what he left behind would only be footprints, but in the eyes of others, it would be a sign. When others had walked on it many times, his direction would naturally become a path. Thinking of this, Zhang Xiaohua seemed to have relaxed a lot. His entire spirit was glowing, as though he had matured a lot. In fact, learning without thinking was a waste. In the past, Zhang Xiaohua only focused on learning. He always felt that his aptitude was inferior to others, and that he had to look up to everyone. Hence, he always buried his head. But during this period of accumulation, it gave him a platform to raise his head. This moment of stagnation, without cultivating, and just thinking, was the starting point of his accumulation. It was a turning point from quantitative change to qualitative change. It would have a profound impact on Zhang Xiaohua's future path. Since he had let go of the mentality of begging others, Zhang Xiaohua immediately considered the third level of ethereal steps. That was the true Qinggong. This was the martial art that Zhang Xiaohua yearned for even in his dreams. Just thinking about it made him addicted. A person could freely jump in the forest, no longer having to use his feet to measure the ground step by step. It was as though the entire world belonged to him. At the very least, once he mastered Qinggong, if he wanted to return to the Guizhuang house, he would no longer need to take the horse carriage. Wouldn't that save him a lot of money? Thinking about it, Zhang Xiaohua couldn't wait to rush into the forest to practice Qinggong. But just as he got up, his heart trembled and he felt ashamed. Just now, he was thinking deeply about taking a path that no one had taken before. But this path wasn't easy to take. He had to take one step at a time before he could see the end. If he was always so careless and lost his composure, he might end up breaking down the moment he took the first step. Thus, Zhang Xiaohua returned to the straw hut and sat down cross-legged. He calmed his heart and cultivated the Heart Sutra. Only then did he pick up the Qigong technique from his memories. Although Zhang Xiaohua didn't have an image of the Qigong technique recorded in the ethereal steps, he still remembered the incantation clearly. He meditated according to the incantation and pondered over it bit by bit until he was sure that he didn't miss anything. Only then did he get up and come to the forest. However, the results of the practice were both beyond his expectations and within his expectations. Zhang Xiaohua couldn't even master the first step of the levitation technique. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't make the inner energy flow through his meridians like what was mentioned in the ethereal steps, producing the levitation technique. The reason why it was out of his expectations was because he thought that inner energy was the foundation of Qigong. As long as he had inner energy, as long as he followed the instructions of the cultivation technique, he would be able to use Qigong by moving his inner energy. However, reality told him a cruel truth. Any imagination was just an illusion. Only practice was the way to go. The reason why it wasn't out of his expectations was because all the martial arts that he had learned were basically not done in one go. Unless it was a bumpy road, experiencing different twists and turns. If this Qigong was successfully practiced smoothly, then Zhang Xiaohua would really doubt his own noble character. Zhang Xiaohua, who had failed in practicing Qigong, walked out of the forest. He couldn't help but naturally thought of He Tianshu. Although he had already decided on his own path, but looking at how others were walking, he could learn from them. He. Moreover, it had been a long time since he had received guidance from this cheap master of his. Zhang Xiaohua really wanted to hear his opinion. As Zhang Xiaohua convinced himself in his heart, he walked towards the small courtyard. It was a pity that He Tianshu wasn't in the house. Zhang Xiaohua, who had humbly asked for guidance, hit a wall. He could only resentfully return to his straw hut and meditate to practice. When he saw He Tianshu, it was already the afternoon of the second day. Sitting in front of Zhang Xiaohua, He Tianshu's face was glowing. He was very spirited and didn't have the dispirited look of staying up late to comprehend the footwork. Zhang Xiaohua was very surprised. Could it be that this footwork had a great nourishing effect after comprehending it to perfection? After asking in detail, they found out that He Tianshu had yet to fully comprehend the second level of the ethereal steps. However, he had recently returned to the pharmacy hall. Just by relying on the portion of the cultivation method that he had comprehended, he had easily defeated someone that he had never been able to defeat in the past. That scene had shocked everyone in the pharmacy hall. Those who had originally wanted to watch the show immediately changed their allegiance and tried to worm their way into being friends with him, wanting to know the reason behind it. This allowed He Tianshu, who had always been disliked in the pharmacy hall, to let out a huge sigh of relief. It was a pity that he wouldn't dare to tell anyone about ethereal steps even if he was beaten to death. Only when he returned could he share the joy with Zhang Xiaohua. Seeing He Tianshu's smug and satisfied look because of a victory, Zhang Xiaohua felt a little sad. The pugilistic world had always been the theme of the strong preying on the weak. It was the same in the Misty School. If one didn't have strong strength, they would be bullied no matter where they went. After He Tianshu had vividly described what had happened in the pharmacy hall, Zhang Xiaohua also smiled and asked about Qigong. When He Tianshu heard Zhang Xiaohua mention Qigong, he was very puzzled and asked, "Why did you suddenly think of Qigong? You have stayed in the straw hut for quite some time. Have you gained a sense of qi?" Zhang Xiaohua nodded and said, "I have gained a sense of qi," but, without waiting for Zhang Xiaohua to finish speaking, He Tianshu clapped his hands and praised, "Good, Zhang Xiaohua, you are really not bad. I thought that it would be difficult for you to make any progress in terms of internal strength. Now that you have relied on the reckless bull strength, you have actually gained a sense of qi. This cultivation technique really has its merits." When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she wanted to correct him, but when she opened her mouth, she didn't say it out loud. He Tianshu didn't notice Zhang Xiaohua's expression and continued, however, if you want to practice Qigong just because you have a sense of qi, it is still too early. I remember that when I was young, I also practiced internal strength for 2 years before I started practicing Qigong. You have to first consolidate your sense of qi and cultivate your internal strength to a certain level before you can use your internal strength and use Qigong. When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she probed, then Captain He, how long have you been practicing Qigong? He Tianshu said without hesitation, 1 year. I remember very clearly that it was an entire year. It can be considered average. However, although the Qigong that we practice is a secret of the Misty School, our Misty School has a lot of Qigong techniques and that can be considered average. Zhang Xiaohua was dumbfounded and said, that long? Yes, why? How long did you think it would take? 1 day. Half a year. He Tianshu found it a little funny. He continued, Qigong is a technique of using internal strength. It doesn't need the internal strength of a fist technique. The meridians of those fist techniques are fixed. As long as you follow the moves of the fist technique and send your internal strength to the place according to the meridians, it will be fine. Fist techniques have their own meridians? Zhang Xiaohua asked in surprise. That's right. He Tianshu explained, many of the internal fist techniques are also internal force cultivation methods. Every move needs to be complemented by specialized internal force. Of course, there are many fist techniques that aren't. However, the power of these fist techniques is small. Moreover, the latter is something that most people can practice. The former is a secret of many sections. Zhang Xiaohua fell into deep thought. Seeing that her Big Dipper magical fist couldn't use internal strength, it must be because of this. She didn't know if the Big Dipper magical fist could be of help when she reached the 9th level. Following that, He Tianshu asked again, why are you asking about Qigong? Did your second brother find an internal strength cultivation method for you? Zhang Xiaohua was stunned and asked, Captain He, have you seen all 3 levels of ethereal steps? He Tianshu was puzzled, I just saw the 2nd level. Why? Is there a problem? Zhang Xiaohua didn't know whether to laugh or cry and said, you should take a good look at the 3rd level. You will know when you see it. When He Tianshu heard that, he carefully took out the movement technique from his chest and picked out the 3rd level cultivation method that he didn't look at. The 3rd level cultivation method only had 2 pages. Just the first page, He Tianshu looked at it for a long time. The more he looked, the more excited he became. His eyes were shining. Zhang Xiaohua was very puzzled. Could it be that this cultivation method was very powerful? She didn't seem to feel it. After a long while, He Tianshu reluctantly moved his gaze away from the first page and looked at the 2nd secret manual. This time, it was different from the first page. When He Tianshu saw the first line, his expression changed greatly. He immediately stood up from his chair and muttered, how is this possible? How is this possible? After that, he read 10 lines at a time. The contents of the 2 pages were about the same. He Tianshu took a long time to read the first page, while the 2nd page was finished in a short while. After He Tianshu finished reading, he sat back in his chair and closed his eyes to think. After a long time, he opened his eyes and looked at Zhang Xiaohua tiredly. He asked, Zhang Xiaohua, have you seen the Qigong recorded on these 2 pages? Zhang Xiaohua nodded and said, yes, Captain He. The last time I brought it over, I saw it. But when I practiced the first page, I couldn't control my internal energy. He Tianshu smiled and said, you are biting off more than you can chew. You have just gained the qi sense. Where would you get the internal energy to drive it? Then, he waved the manual in his hand and said, Zhang Xiaohua, I really have to thank you. I only had the opportunity to learn such a profound Qigong because of you. I owe you a favor. Zhang Xiaohua was shocked when he heard that. He waved his hand and said, Captain He, please don't say that. You spent so much effort to teach me the fist technique, and I haven't thanked you yet. Besides, you've made a great contribution in saving the Manor Lord, so you should thank Leader O. He Tianshu smiled and said, I know what to do with my own affairs. Forget it, I won't be so polite with you. I will remember your matter in my heart. Didn't I just say that the Qigong I practiced was the foundation of our Misty School? Almost everyone has to practice it. Do you know the value of this Qigong? Zhang Xiaohua shook her head and thought to herself, it seems like it's nothing. He Tianshu said with a smile, the pros and cons of different Qigong mainly depend on the efficiency of the usage of internal energy and the development of the Qigong. This ethereal steps Qigong can be said to be the best of our ethereal sect's Qigong techniques. It can't be mentioned in the same breath as what I cultivated in the past. With this Qigong, not only can it raise my current Qigong to a higher level, but with the cultivation of my internal energy, this Qigong will have more potential to be unearthed. The quality of this Qigong can be the key to winning or losing a competition. It can even affect one's life. Zhang Xiaohua was stunned and said, it's that serious. Chapter 167. He Tianshu smiled and said, what do you know? Qigong is the most basic skill to protect one's life. Many people who roam the pugilistic world, even if their other martial arts aren't that good, they still have to train their Qigong well. Think about it, if you encounter a fight and your martial arts aren't as good as others, then wouldn't you still have to run away? Those with good Qigong will definitely be able to escape faster. What's more, those with good Qigong will be able to gain the upper hand in a fight. Zhang Xiaohua suddenly understood. He didn't have the experience of fighting with his life on the line, nor did he have the experience of roaming the pugilistic world. Naturally, he didn't know the importance of Qigong. Zhang Xiaohua thought for a moment and asked, Captain He, then these two Qigong? He Tianshu waved his hand to stop Zhang Xiaohua's question and said, Zhang Xiaohua, although this ethereal steps has two Qigong cultivation methods, but to be honest, the first one is a true top-grade Qigong cultivation method while the second one is an extremely precious trash. Zhang Xiaohua opened her mouth wide and said, ah. What's going on? Precious trash. He Tianshu smiled and said, the first cultivation method is a real martial arts method. I can understand it too. If I concentrate on cultivating it, after a few months or even a year, I think I will definitely be able to grasp it. At that time, I can also teach it to you properly. As for the second one, how should I put it? What it says is simply an unimaginable idea. This kind of Qigong cultivation method actually requires the release of qi to form a circulation outside the body. This is simply impossible. Zhang Xiaohua didn't understand and asked, what is qi? He Tianshu explained, it's the kind of hot gas produced in your meridians when you practice internal strength. We call it true qi. Oh. So that's how it is. Zhang Xiaohua understood and said, I thought it was called inner strength. He Tianshu said, true qi, internal force, and internal force have the same meaning. When true qi reaches the attacking fist, the power released is internal force. This kind of power is different from pure strength. It is also called internal force. In fact, it is usually called a mix. There is not much difference. However, how did this qi name come about? It's quite strange. When we were young, we discussed it in detail. Zhang Xiaohua saw that He Tianshu was going off topic and quickly asked, then why can't qi be released? He Tianshu looked at Zhang Xiaohua who didn't understand and asked, do you know what it means to release inner strength? Zhang Xiaohua shook his head and said, I know. Why would I ask you? He Tianshu explained, I don't know the specifics, but I know that once all the inner strength is released outside the body, it will immediately dissipate. It will no longer be controlled by the person who released it. When a high-level inner strength cultivation method is practiced to the end, the inner strength in the body will be incomparably vigorous. Only then can the inner strength in the body be released to a certain range outside the body. If a fist is used, then it will be a fist aura. If a sword is used, then it will be a sword ray. Then, He Tianshu looked around carefully and said in a low voice, I don't know about the rest of the people in Ethereal Sect, including sect leader O. I only heard some rumors that the second elder of the sect who cultivates the 7 ethereal swords has just mastered the sword gleam. That is a legendary martial art in the Jianghu. Looking at Zhang Xiaohua's shocked expression, He Tianshu said, think about it. Such a martial art that consumes inner strength can be used in a sword art to defeat the enemy. But don't you think it's a bit of a waste to use it on Qinggong? Moreover, when you cultivate to the point where you can release qi, your martial arts will be superb. Your Qinggong will also be profound. Why do you need to practice such a flashy floating technique? Then, He Tianshu came to a conclusion, actually, the most important thing is that I have never heard of anyone in the Misty School or the Jianghu who can use Qinggong to float in the air. Zhang Xiaohua still didn't give up and said, if there isn't, then why is it recorded in this ethereal steps? He Tianshu scratched his head and said, who knows? Maybe it's a kind of idea and not a real martial art. It's also a real martial art, but you can only practice this kind of Qinggong when your inner strength is practiced to the extreme. However, these are not things we can care about. I may be qualified to practice the Qinggong lifting technique in front, but you don't even have the qualifications to practice this. It's better to practice your spirit of the bull and build a solid foundation for your inner strength. Hearing He Tianshu say this, Zhang Xiaohua could only stop talking. When it came to martial arts, she was indeed a junior. She didn't have any qualifications to speak in front of He Tianshu. Then, He Tianshu said, the martial arts exhibition is about to begin. Zhang Xiaohua, have you really decided to participate? How are your preparations? When Zhang Xiaohua heard about the martial arts exhibition, she immediately became spirited and said excitedly, of course, I have already asked Manor Lord O to help me sign up. How can I not participate? Actually, I don't have much to prepare. I already know a set of fist techniques. Now, didn't you teach me the ethereal steps? I can use it in the martial arts exhibition. He Tianshu nodded and said, your sword technique is not suitable for the martial arts exhibition. You can only use your fist techniques with your bare hands. Then, He Tianshu seemed to have thought of something funny and said with a smile, but using a fist technique is also quite good. If you really use a weapon, it's not very suitable. Zhang Xiaohua was stunned and puzzled. She asked, not using a weapon? Captain He, what do you mean? He Tianshu laughed and said, you will know when the time comes. It's not good to say it too early. Ha ha ha. Seeing that He Tianshu didn't explain clearly, Zhang Xiaohua didn't ask anymore. She thought to herself, isn't it just a martial arts competition? What's the big deal? At most, I will lose. Then, He Tianshu reminded Zhang Xiaohua to practice the ethereal steps more. Perhaps she would lose some face when the time came. Zhang Xiaohua did not understand what was going on. It was another baffling sentence. There weren't many days left. Although He Tianshu was constantly trying to comprehend the second level of the ethereal steps, in order to not disturb Zhang Xiaohua's preparation, he didn't impart anything to her. And Zhang Xiaohua stayed in the straw hut all day, cultivating the various martial arts she had learned. Early in the morning, Zhang Xiaohua sat cross-legged and silently chanted a mantra. She slowly absorbed the qi in her body into her dantian before slowly opening her eyes. After 10 days of bitter cultivation, Zhang Xiaohua faintly felt that the qi in her meridian seemed to have increased a little. However, she couldn't confirm it. However, diligence could make up for stupidity. She had been drawing qi into her body every day to temper her qi. Although the progress was slow, it was still improvement. Sooner or later, she would have some achievements. After finishing her cultivation, Zhang Xiaohua stood up. Just as she walked to the door of the straw hut, she heard a female voice calling her from outside. Zhang Xiaohua, are you here? It sounded very unfamiliar. It wasn't Qiu Tong's voice. Zhang Xiaohua hurriedly ran out and saw a girl standing far away. Upon closer inspection, it was Qiu Ju. Qiu Ju stood far away shyly and called out softly. When she saw Zhang Xiaohua come out, she quickly raised her hand and greeted her. Zhang Xiaohua lightly ran over and looked at Qiu Ju, who was blushing. She asked, "Elder sister Qiu Ju, is there anything you need from me?" Qiu Ju said softly, "Miss asked me to inform you that the martial arts exhibition will be held today. She wants you to pack up and go to the inner courtyard. In a while, the Misty School will send someone to pick you up." Zhang Xiaohua was pleasantly surprised. "Is that so, elder sister Qiu Ju? The competition is starting today. Alright, please wait a moment. I'll go pack up." After speaking, she turned to go to the straw hut. But after taking a few steps, she awkwardly came back and said, "Elder sister Qiu Ju, I don't think there's anything to pack. Let's go now." Qiu Ju covered her mouth and smiled. The martial arts exhibition will be held for a few days. Although you don't need to pack anything, you should still put the things in the straw hut into the small house first. There won't be anyone in the medicine field these few days. When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she couldn't help but blush. She chuckled and thanked Qiu Ju for the reminder. She quickly ran back to the straw hut and packed up everything. Only after bringing everything back to the small house did she follow Qiu Ju to the inner courtyard. It was the same small courtyard where they had set off to the south last time. A young man dressed in tight clothes was already impatiently waiting there. He kept pacing back and forth. When he saw Qiu Ju and Zhang Xiaohua walking over, he frowned deeply. Although Zhang Xiaohua was walking behind Qiu Ju, she had long seen the man's displeased expression. Zhang Xiaohua guessed that perhaps he had waited for too long and was feeling impatient. Thus, she hurriedly took a few steps forward and passed Qiu Ju. She cupped her hands and bowed to the man. "Senior Marshal Brother, I'm very sorry to have troubled you." The man's brows didn't loosen. He coldly looked up and down at Zhang Xiaohua and replied, "I'm very sorry. You're not from our Misty School. I can't accept this, Senior Marshal Brother. Please take it back. Are you the candidate for this year's Huanxi Mountain Villa to participate in the martial arts exhibition?" When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she was very embarrassed. Usually, she would call Nie Xiaoer and the others as Senior Marshal Brother. Seeing that this person was about the same age as them, she called him Senior Marshal Brother. She didn't expect to be rebuffed so quickly. It seemed that this Misty School wasn't all amiable people. Hearing that person's question, Zhang Xiaohua hurriedly replied, "Yes, this one is participating in the martial arts exhibition." The corner of the man's mouth pulled down and he sneered. "I heard that Huanxi Mountain Villa hasn't done such a disappointing thing for many years. It's strange that someone doesn't know what's good for them today. However, looking at your age, there's no harm in it. Hee, just take it as an eye-opener." Zhang Xiaohua was puzzled. He wanted to ask what was going on, but the person in front of him looked like he was unapproachable. He did not want to get close to him, so he did not bother to ask. He would find out in a while anyway, so why bother asking now? Qiu Ju was at the side. Looking at that person's face, she felt unhappy. Unfortunately, she wasn't Qiu Tong and didn't have Yan's support. Adding on to her weak personality, she didn't know how to criticize that person. She only looked at Zhang Xiaohua, who was half a head lower than her, and said, "Zhang Xiaohua, I'll send you here. Go with him. The Misty School will naturally have someone to arrange it for you." Zhang Xiaohua laughed and said, "Okay, big sister Qiu Ju. Thank you. When I win, I'll tell you first when I come back." Qiu Ju pursed her lips and smiled. "Okay, we'll wait for your good news. When you compete, be careful. If you can't win, just admit defeat and don't hurt your body." Zhang Xiaohua said, "I know. Big sister Qiu Ju, you can go back." The person next to her snorted and sneered, "Win? Just don't get beaten up badly. However, your sister warned you well. Why don't you ask her to embroider a white handkerchief for you with the words 'Hero, spare my life'? When you can't win, just throw the handkerchief away." When Qiu Ju heard this, her face turned red with anger. Zhang Xiaohua was also angry. She stared at that person and said, "What does it have to do with you when we're talking? Are the people of Huanxi Manor as cowardly as you say? Why don't I report this to my manor head? What do you think?" When that person heard her mention Yan, he couldn't help but feel guilty and said, "This, Choju was a kind person." She quickly smoothed things over and said, "That's enough. Huanxi Manor and the Misty School are one. It's already late, so let's hurry up and leave." Seeing Choju like this, Zhang Xiaohua also smiled and said, "I know, big sister Choju." Then she said to that person, "Why aren't you leaving? I'm still waiting to be beaten up." That person didn't say anything else. He turned around and walked to the tree. He untied the reins tied to the tree and led 2 horses to Zhang Xiaohua, saying, "Then please get on the horses, great hero." Looking at the handsome horses in front of her, Zhang Xiaohua was a little dumbfounded. She hesitated and didn't go forward. That person smiled and said, "Great hero, please get on the horses." Zhang Xiaohua waved her hand and said, "Forget it. It's only a few steps away. We can just walk. There's no need to ride these horses." That person didn't give up and said, Then what? If we don't ride a horse, won't it show that our Misty School has no etiquette? Please get on the horses." Zhang Xiaohua scratched her head and muttered, but, I still don't know how to ride a horse." That person narrowed his eyes and said, "It's okay. These horses are the most docile. Just sit on it. There's no need to know how to ride a horse." Zhang Xiaohua didn't believe him and asked, "Really?" That person patted his chest and said, "Really? Let's go quickly. We won't make it if we're late." Only then did Zhang Xiaohua step forward and said, "Okay then. Don't lie to me." That person saw that Zhang Xiaohua didn't even know how to get on a horse. He walked to Zhang Xiaohua's side and handed the reins to Zhang Xiaohua. Then he put his hands under Zhang Xiaohua's armpits and used a bit of strength to lift Zhang Xiaohua onto the horse's back. Then he put his feet in the stirrups and hit the horses but with his hand and said, "No, how could I lie to you?" But in her heart she said, "It would be strange if I didn't lie to you." Then she was surprised, this youth's physique doesn't look thin or weak. How can he be so light? How strange. After the horse was hit by that person, it immediately let out a long neigh and raised its front hooves, almost throwing Zhang Xiaohua to the ground. It scared Zhang Xiaohua so much that she tightly held onto the reins, her small face somewhat pale. The horse's front hooves landed on the ground and it immediately exerted force with its back hooves, shooting out like an arrow. Seeing this, Qiu Ju's expression also changed and said, "How can you do this? Aren't you afraid that Zhang Xiaohua will get hurt?" That person laughed and said, "Zhang Xiaohua, haha, a little girl's name. It's okay, Qiu Ju, right? This horse is very docile. I didn't say anything wrong. It's just that it's a bit fast. Moreover, this old horse knows the way. It won't go anywhere else." After saying this, she also pulled the reins and swung the stirrups to get on the horse. With a tug of the reins and a clamp of her legs, she didn't use any strength. The horse spread its hooves and galloped away. Only Qiu Ju was left looking at the empty small courtyard. She stomped her small feet a few times and turned to enter the inner courtyard. Zhang Xiaohua fell into that person's trap and almost fell off the horse. Then, the horse galloped out of the small courtyard like lightning. At the beginning, Zhang Xiaohua tightly held onto the reins of the horse. Her body swayed left and right, almost falling off every time. It scared Zhang Xiaohua so much that her soul almost fell to the ground. When the horse left the small courtyard and went on a straight path, Zhang Xiaohua's body finally stabilized. After her body stabilized, Zhang Xiaohua's mind also calmed down. The person from the Misty School was right. The horse was very handsome and had a docile character. Riding on the horse, although it was fast, it was very stable. Not long after, Zhang Xiaohua got used to this speed. Her small buttocks swayed left and right as she slowly adjusted her center of gravity. She liked the feeling of leaving everything behind. However, before she could enjoy the pleasure of galloping, in front of her was the side door of Huanxi Manor. Zhang Xiaohua suddenly thought that she didn't know how to stop the horse. What should she do? Seeing that the side door was getting closer and closer, and the mole on the guard's face could be seen clearly, Zhang Xiaohua's heart skipped a beat. She immediately shouted, "Get out of the way, I'm a newbie. Get out of the way, I'm a newbie." The guard of Huanxi Manor had already heard the sound of the horse's hooves and saw two unusually handsome horses galloping out of the small door of the inner courtyard. When the two horses came in, he had already checked and knew that they were brought in by the people from the Misty School. But if the horses wanted to go out, he still had to stop and check. After all, it was his duty. Moreover, he didn't know who was sitting on the horse in front of him. The tall horse only had half of its head exposed, so he couldn't see the face clearly. Who knew who it was? But when he saw that the horse was already in front of him and didn't stop, he was puzzled. Then he heard someone shout, "Get out of the way." The guard sneered and thought to himself, "Get out of the way. How can I get out of the way without checking? How can I let you go out?" And the last sentence, "I'm a newbie," made him even more puzzled. What did it mean? But when the horse rushed in front of him and didn't have the slightest intention of stopping, he instantly understood that this was what a newbie meant. The horse rushed straight over with a force of 1,000 pounds. Who would dare to stop it directly? Fortunately, the guard's martial arts were excellent. He immediately dodged and fell to the ground, barely dodging the horse. When the horse leaped over him, the guard took a peek. Wasn't the person riding on the horse the youth from the medicine field? What was going on? When the horse galloped past the side door, the guard jumped up from the ground like a carp and patted the dust off his body. Just as he was about to speak, he heard someone say, "Get out of the way, get out of the way, I have an urgent matter." The guard thought to himself, "Get out of the way again, could it be a newbie?" When he raised his head, he saw that the horse behind him had also galloped in front of him and didn't have the slightest intention of stopping. He had no choice but to roll over and fall to the ground. Chapter 168. Ha ha ha. The man from the Misty School saw the guard of the Huanxi Villa fall to the ground, but he did not stop and said, "Brother, sorry, I am in a hurry." With that, he took out a waist token from his arms, which was given to him when he entered the villa just now. He threw it on the ground, then shook the reins and chased after Zhang Xiaohua. When the man drove the horse through the side door, the guard did not immediately get up. He looked up and saw that there were no more galloping horses behind him. Then he stood up like a carp, patted the dust off his body, and walked over to pick up the waist token. He curled his lips and spat on the ground with a "bah" sound. He secretly cursed, "XXX, aren't you just a disciple of the Misty School? What's so great about you? You let me practice carp jumping twice. When I gain power one day, I will let you do push-ups every day." Unfortunately, the disciple of the Misty School had already gone far. How could he hear him? Perhaps, the guard said that because he was far away. Besides, Zhang Xiaohua shouted and walked. He actually rushed out of the side door of the Huanxi Villa. Zhang Xiaohua could not help but feel proud of his quick wit. Zhang Xiaohua did not know how to control the horse. Fortunately, the horse knew the way and did not need Zhang Xiaohua to worry. Seeing the horse following the road out of the Huanxi Villa and running towards the ethereal villa, Zhang Xiaohua's heart was relieved. There were many collisions on the road. Perhaps the horse was a good steed and avoided all of them. Perhaps the words of Zhang Xiaohua, "Get out of the way, I am a novice," played a role and gave others a hint. In short, they all safely avoided. When the horse ran to the straight road in front of the Misty Mountain Villa, Zhang Xiaohua's heart was finally at ease. The shouting along the way made him feel that his throat was dry. However, before Zhang Xiaohua felt relieved, the horse had already run to the front of the archway of the ethereal mountain villa. There were some guards in front of the archway. Seeing that the horse was in front of them, Zhang Xiaohua saw that the horse had no intention of stopping. She had no choice but to raise her voice again and shouted, "Get out of the way, I'm a novice." When the guards saw the horse in front of them, they didn't panic and didn't dodge. Zhang Xiaohua became more anxious and shouted even louder, "Get out of the way, I'm a novice, get out of the way, I'm a novice." When the guards heard this, they had strange expressions on their faces, but they still stood straight. When the horse got close enough, one of them let out a sound that sounded like whoosh. The horse's galloping body immediately stopped and its forehoofs steadily stopped in front of the guards. Zhang Xiaohua, who was on the horse's back, was miserable. She thought that her shout had reached the ears of the guards. Presumably, they would dodge and her horse would rush into the archway like before. But who expected that the horse would suddenly stop? She had to admit that the horse was really handsome. Zhang Xiaohua was caught off guard. She immediately turned over from the horse's back and flew into the air like a cloud, rushing to the archway in front of her. The guard in front of her was also surprised and said, "She's really a novice." She immediately tapped the tip of her foot and leaped up. Using her qinggong, she flew in the direction of Zhang Xiaohua, preparing to catch Zhang Xiaohua's body from below. But just as she was about to catch Zhang Xiaohua, something strange happened. When Zhang Xiaohua flew off the horse's back, her hand was still firmly holding onto the reins. When her body flew into the air, the reins reached the end and immediately stopped her flying momentum. Therefore, Zhang Xiaohua stopped flying forward and landed straight on the ground. In fact, when Zhang Xiaohua flew off from the horse's back, he immediately thought of using the footwork of the ethereal steps, or some other techniques, or a method to stabilize his body and land gracefully. But once she flew off the horse's back, she couldn't control her body. How could she have the time to use any techniques? That guard used his qinggong to wait for her at the place where Zhang Xiaohua flew out. Moreover, the reins of the horse had changed the direction of Zhang Xiaohua. By the time the guards saw her, she had already used up all her strength and couldn't move anymore. She could only watch helplessly as Zhang Xiaohua fell straight on the ground with a "pa" sound, raising a cloud of dust. That guard couldn't help but grit his teeth. Using his hands to cover his eyes, he secretly said, "How tragic." But it was unknown if he was talking about himself or Zhang Xiaohua. In the history of the Misty School, such a thing had never happened before. It was really unprecedented and would never happen again. Luckily, Zhang Xiaohua's main force had been dissipated by the reins of the horse. He fell from such a high place only because he was dizzy and didn't know how to deal with it. Otherwise, at such a height, even a little boy might not be able to handle it. Therefore, by the time the guard ran over, he had already stood up. That guard saw Zhang Xiaohua standing up and asked, "Are you all right?" Zhang Xiaohua patted the dust on her body and said, "Oh, I'm fine. Just my clothes are dirty." When that guard heard, he smiled and asked again, "Who are you? Why are you riding our Misty School's horse?" Before Zhang Xiaohua could answer, the sound of hurried horse hooves could be heard from behind. Zhang Xiaohua didn't raise her head and said in a bad mood, "Ask that guy behind me." Sure enough, when the person from Misty School came closer and whispered into the guard's ear, that guard also had a strange smile on his face. He patted Zhang Xiaohua's shoulder and praised, "Good, you're brave." Zhang Xiaohua didn't understand, but looking at the face of that person from Misty School, she said fiercely, "How dare you trick me?" That person spread out his hands and said with an innocent face, "No, I'm just telling the truth. Horses are very gentle." Zhang Xiaohua gritted her teeth and said, "Then why did you hit the horse's butt?" That person shrugged and said, "Brother, your sister Qiuju already said that it was getting late. Didn't I also want you to hurry to our Misty School? I also made a mistake out of kindness." Zhang Xiaohua angrily said, "Is your surname Zhang?" That person was stunned and said, "My surname is Jiang, not Zhang." Zhang Xiaohua said with a straight face, "Since your surname isn't Zhang, then don't call me brother. When your surname is Zhang, then we'll talk about it." After saying this, she turned around and walked past the decorated archway with her head held high. The man from the ethereal sect was stunned. Looking at Zhang Xiaohua's short back, he chuckled in annoyance. He turned around to lead two horses and followed after him. Poor Zhang Xiaohua. She hadn't even participated in the martial arts exhibition and had already suffered such a loss. It really wasn't a good omen. Who knew what the future martial arts exhibition would be like? After turning around the decorated archway, they were faced with a large and empty plaza. Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but be stunned and stopped in her tracks. Seeing Zhang Xiaohua stop in her tracks, Mr. Jiang was also bewildered. However, he didn't stop walking. He walked past Zhang Xiaohua and continued to lead his horse forward. Just as he walked past one shoulder, he heard Zhang Xiaohua shout, "Ee!" Strange. Mr. Jiang couldn't help but turn his head and ask, "What's wrong? What's strange about it?" Zhang Xiaohua glared at him in a bad mood and said, "Did I talk to you? Why do you like to talk to people so much? Why is this plaza so deserted? It doesn't look like there's going to be a meeting." Mr. Jiang rolled his eyes and said, "What did you think it should look like?" Zhang Xiaohua said in high spirits, "I thought that this plaza would at least have a stage the height of 2 people. There would be countless disciples watching from below, and there would be disciples competing on the stage." Mr. Jiang laughed out loud and said, "You're talking about the stage in your hometown, right? Our Misty School doesn't have one like that." Zhang Xiaohua was stunned. He thought to himself, "That's right, I was talking about the stage where I watched the show in Luzhen." She couldn't help but blush as she said timidly, "Then what does the martial arts exhibition look like?" Mr. Jiang sneered and said, "What the martial arts exhibition looks like, you'll naturally know once you enter the Misty School's gates. If we were to set up a stage in the plaza outside our gates like you, our Misty School wouldn't be able to mingle in the Jianghu anymore. We would lose all face." After saying this, he ignored Zhang Xiaohua and walked straight to the side door. Zhang Xiaohua looked at Mr. Jiang's back for a while and could only quickly chase after him. After passing through the side door, Mr. Jiang handed the horse over to a professional before turning around to call for Zhang Xiaohua. Zhang Xiaohua had an unhappy expression as she walked through the side door. But when she walked through the side door, she was immediately stunned by the scene in front of her. In the plaza in front of her, there were actually many small stages standing there. Zhang Xiaohua had a puzzled expression and turned to ask Mr. Jiang, "Didn't you say that there was no stage?" Mr. Jiang had an innocent expression and said, "I only said that our Misty School doesn't have a stage, but I didn't say that there were so many stages. Look, there's more than one in front of you." Zhang Xiaohua gritted her teeth and didn't say anything else. The plaza in front of her was very large. There were many small stages that were the height of 2 people set up in an orderly manner. It was smaller than the stages that they usually watched during the New Year in Lu Town. There was not a single person on the stages. There were quite a lot of people in the plaza, but they didn't gather together to watch the show. Instead, some people hurried away while others gathered together and gestured about something. But the entire plaza didn't look like it was in a mess, and it wasn't noisy either. It looked like everything was in order. However, Zhang Xiaohua looked at the scene in front of her and felt that it was a little awkward. But she couldn't put her finger on it. Seeing Zhang Xiaohua acting like a country bumpkin entering the city, Mr. Jiang was very disdainful. He distanced himself from Zhang Xiaohua and acted as if he didn't know him. But after waiting for a while, he saw that Zhang Xiaohua was still ignoring him. He couldn't help but feel a little angry and went forward to say, "Zhang Xiaohua, why aren't you leaving? What are you doing here? Let people see you, a wooden chicken." Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohua was stunned and said in surprise, "Isn't the martial arts exhibition right here? Where are we going?" Mr. Jiang sneered and said, "Who told you that the martial arts exhibition is here? Did I say that? Let's go. I'll send you there quickly. I still have my own things to do. I really don't know what you're thinking. You want me to go to the villa to pick you up? You can come by yourself." Zhang Xiaohua suddenly understood. She immediately said, "If you have something to do, then hurry up and do it. I'll go by myself." Mr. Jiang hurriedly waved his hand and said, "Don't get me into trouble. Look at you. You won't give up until you cause trouble. I'd better send you there personally." Seeing that the other party didn't trust her, there was nothing she could say. Zhang Xiaohua could only obediently follow behind Mr. Jiang and walk into the depths of the Misty Mountain Villa. This was Zhang Xiaohua's third time entering the Misty School. The scene was very different from the previous 2 times. Along the way, as long as there was a large square, there would be many small arenas. Zhang Xiaohua carefully counted. Just the ones that she saw, there were dozens of them. She couldn't help but feel puzzled. What was the use of so many arenas? Were they all used for martial arts competitions? But looking at Mr. Jiang's expression, Zhang Xiaohua didn't want to be a curious child. She didn't know how big the Misty Mountain Villa was. Mr. Jiang had already led Zhang Xiaohua for a long time, but they still hadn't reached the place. The more they walked, the more confused Zhang Xiaohua became. Wasn't it just participating in the martial arts exhibition? Why did they have to walk to the innermost part? Weren't there many arenas in the square outside? Oh, that's not right. They were arenas. After passing through several winding corridors and small courtyards, they finally arrived at a large gate with a high wall. The red lacquered gate was tightly shut and was much larger than the gates of the other small courtyards. The wall was also very high and stretched very far, as if it was an independent place. Mr. Jiang walked forward and used all his strength to knock on the door knocker. Immediately, the door creaked open and a head poked out. Seeing that it was Mr. Jiang, he couldn't help but ask, "Why did you arrive so late? The martial arts exhibition is about to begin." Mr. Jiang immediately smiled apologetically and said, "Steward Su, the brat from the Huanxi Mountain Villa took his time. I also hurried over." That person looked at Zhang Xiaohua behind Mr. Jiang and said with dissatisfaction, "You clearly know that Boss O comes here first every year. Why didn't you come earlier? All right, hurry up and come in." Mr. Jiang turned around and pulled Zhang Xiaohua's sleeve, saying in a low voice, "All right, this is the place. Zhang Xiaohua, this is our Misty School's Young Eagle Hall's Steward Su. Follow him in." After he finished speaking, he cupped his hands towards Steward Su and hurriedly turned around and left, as if he didn't want to stay for even a second longer. Zhang Xiaohua looked strangely at Mr. Jiang's back as he left. She couldn't help but say with envy, "This guy's character is terrible, but his qinggong is still very authentic." Steward Su was already unhappy when he saw Zhang Xiaohua's foolish look. He frowned and said, "Young man, are you going to participate in the martial arts exhibition? Why aren't you coming in?" Only then did Zhang Xiaohua return to her senses. She hurriedly cupped her hands and entered the courtyard through the red lacquered gate. Zhang Xiaohua didn't enter the courtyard, but once she did, she was even more surprised. What was going on here? This was a plaza that was more than 3 times larger than the plaza behind the Misty School's decorated archway. There were also countless small arenas set up in the plaza. However, in the middle of the plaza, there was a square arena that was even larger than Lu Zhen's stage during the New Year. There were already a few people standing on it. Zhang Xiaohua's eyes were sharp and she had already noticed that sect leader O Peng was among them. Actually, this wasn't the main reason why Zhang Xiaohua was surprised. What she was surprised about was that the plaza was filled with people. These people all had tender smiles on their faces and their hair had yet to fade. Most of them were even shorter than Zhang Xiaohua and looked to be in their teens. What was going on here? Just as Zhang Xiaohua was surprised, she suddenly saw 2 familiar faces at the back of the crowd. These 2 people's faces were alternating between green and red, and their expressions were very awkward. Who else could it be but Sheng Wanyun and Yu Dei of the Lotus Flower Escort Agency? Although the 2 people were standing at the back, their height was incompatible with the surrounding youths. They really stood out from the crowd. Moreover, although the youths' expressions were childish, they stood upright and looked like they were well trained. Although everyone was looking forward, there were still some people who would secretly glance back at these 2 strange outsiders. With so many people looking at them, the 2 people's hearts grew cold and they felt uncomfortable standing to the left and right. Just as the 2 people's hearts were filled with regret, they suddenly saw the door open and a familiar person came in. They were overjoyed and wanted to wave and call out, but when they saw Zhang Xiaohua's figure, which was similar to the youth beside her. They raised their hands but didn't call out. Zhang Xiaohua was also overjoyed when she saw a familiar face. When Steward Su saw this, he naturally knew that the three people were familiar with each other. He nodded and pointed to the two people, then hurriedly went to other places. When Zhang Xiaohua saw that the steward had gone far away, she ran to Sheng Guanyun and Yu Dei's side and cupped her hands in greeting. She couldn't wait to ask, "Brother De, what's going on?" Yu Dei opened her mouth and was about to speak when a soft and deep voice sounded from the stage. "Now, I announce the official start of the Misty School's martial arts exhibition. Next, let's invite our sect leader O to speak." Thus, a wave of orderly applause sounded. The eyes of the group of 10-year-old youths in the square shone with reverence as they stared straight at the tall stage. No, it was O Peng who was slowly standing up on the stage. O Peng stood in the middle of the stage and pressed his hands in the air. The applause under the stage immediately stopped, as if it had been rehearsed for a long time. O Peng nodded in satisfaction and then began to speak. O Peng's voice wasn't loud, but even though Zhang Xiaohua was standing far away on the other side of the square, she could still hear him very clearly. She heard O Peng speak, "Disciples of Kitty Hawk Hall, in this season of spring, when winter passes and spring comes, when all living things come back to life, when spring warms and flowers bloom, when the sun is bright and beautiful, we welcome the annual martial arts exhibition. Here, I have a few words to say to all of you. I have to say these words every year, and I have to mention them every year. Don't be annoyed. This is the hope and care that we, the older generation, have for you. You are the rising sun, and this era belongs to you. If you are rich, misty wealth will be misty wealth. If you are strong, misty strength will be misty strength. We, the older generation, have watched you grow up. You are the hope of Misty School. Today, I am standing here to speak to you. A few years later, I will be one of you, standing here to speak to your juniors. Misty is the Misty that is passed down from generation to generation. As long as you can stand out, we are not afraid of dying on the beach." Sect leader O's speech actually lasted for half the time it took to eat a meal, and he didn't stop at all. His earnest words reverberated in the air above the square. The faces of all the disciples were flushed red, and their small fists were tightly clenched. It was as if they had been encouraged to see the beautiful hope that O Peng described. Only Zhang Xiaohua and the others could hear the reverberating sound. They couldn't help but be shocked. This O Peng's internal energy was too profound. Zhang Xiaohua even thought that if there were beams in the square, wouldn't the sound echo for 3 days? Chapter 169. O Peng spoke eloquently for a long time before finally saying, "Young Eagle Hall disciples, the first rank of commoners is the beginning of the Misty School's disciples. Only after you pass the first rank of commoners can you be considered a true disciple of our Misty School. Since the first session of the martial arts exhibition, the previous sect masters have always announced the start of the exhibition at your place. Today is no exception. I now announce that the martial arts exhibition has officially begun. I hope you can achieve good results and live up to the people in the sect who care about you, and live up to the sweat you've shed." At this point, the audience burst into thunderous cheers and applause. Zhang Xiaohua also seemed to understand from the applause. He Tianchu's strange expression, Jiang Mohan's appearance, and Sheng Guanyun's and Yu Dei's faces. The first rank of commoners was clearly a test for the 10-year-old disciples of the Misty School. It was a competition for children, so why did the Lotus Flower Escort Agency in Huanxi Mountain Manor blindly meddle in it? Even looking at the surrounding children, many of them were only 7 or 8 years old. These were all extremely talented people, and perhaps their subordinates had real martial arts. Letting Yu Dei and the others compete with these children, if they lost, they would naturally lose face. Even if they won, what was there to say? Were they very proud? Zhang Xiaohua also instantly understood the real reason why the Lotus Flower Escort Agency and Huanxi Mountain Manor hadn't participated in the martial arts exhibition for decades. The predecessor of the Misty School who set the rules was truly filthy to the extreme. Who would compete with these children who weren't even 10 years old? Did you welcome the people of Huanxi Mountain Manor and the Lotus Flower Escort Agency to participate? If you didn't welcome them, then just say so. Why did you have to beat around the bush and only allow them to participate in the first rank of commoners? Zhang Xiaohua was completely speechless. However, looking at the group of children whose eyes were bloodshot because of Sect Master O's encouragement, and comparing their height, Zhang Xiaohua didn't seem to be much taller than them. Then looking at Sheng Guanyun and Yu Dei who were standing there with their hands tied, Zhang Xiaohua was secretly delighted. In a while, how would you compete with the children? Could it be that Yu Dei could break the children's palms? What about gang leader O's expression? Zhang Xiaohua thought maliciously. Leaving aside the little devil in Zhang Xiaohua's heart that was secretly laughing, the hundreds of youths in the arena were methodically divided into different groups by some disciples who didn't look young, and rushed to their respective arenas. Only Zhang Xiaohua and the other two stood to the side as if they were idling around. Once again, they received a lot of supercilious looks from the other youths. The people on the big fighting ring had already dispersed, and O Peng was nowhere to be seen. Most likely, he had gone outside to continue fooling the other members. There was only the sound of hurried footsteps in the square. There was no noise like when Zhang Xiaohua saw children walking in the Guizhuang house. Zhang Xiaohua was secretly amazed. This god's favored son was really different. Thinking about it, if she was his age, wouldn't she be jumping for joy? These children were indeed so calm, as if they were used to this. All of them had the appearance of great talents. Suddenly, Zhang Xiaohua thought of something. No wonder second brother didn't participate in this martial arts exhibition. If he came to compete with these children for a rank 1 commoner robe, how funny would that be? Not long after, the flow of people in the square stopped. All the youths were in their positions. Steward Su hurriedly ran over with 3 small plates in his hand. With an apologetic expression, he said to Zhang Xiaohua and the others, "The 3 of you have been waiting for a long time. Because Huanxi Manor and Lotus Escort Agency haven't participated in this competition for decades, their special plates have long been lost. These plates have just been obtained from elsewhere. It just so happens that a few disciples are ill and can't participate. Please use these plates." After he finished speaking, he handed over the plates. Zhang Xiaohua's eyes were sharp and she had already seen the numbers on them. They were respectively 2, 250, and 111. Seeing Steward Su hand over the plates to her, she wanted to reach out and take the plate with the number 111. However, she didn't expect that Sheng Guanyun and Yu Dei would both step forward and stand in front of her. How could Zhang Xiaohua's height be compared to theirs? With this step forward, they immediately blocked her behind them. After the 2 of them finished choosing, Steward Su only had a plate with the number 250 left in his hand. He held it up, his eyes full of smiles as he looked at Zhang Xiaohua with interest. Zhang Xiaohua had no choice but to take the number 250. She stole a glance at the plates in Sheng Guanyun and Yu Dei's hands and thought maliciously, "One is 2, very brainless. The other is 111, I'll let you be alone for the rest of your life. How dare you compete with me?" When Steward Su saw that the 3 of them had already divided the plates, he clapped his hands and said, "All right, the 3 of you, come with me. Let's participate in the competition of the martial arts exhibition together." After he finished speaking, he turned around and led the 3 of them to the center of the square. They walked to a small ring in the center. There was a group of youths who looked about the same size as Zhang Xiaohua. Half of them were even taller than Zhang Xiaohua. Zhang Xiaohua was happy. If she was in this group, wouldn't she be very ordinary? Even if she lost, it wouldn't be too embarrassing. But coincidentally, Steward Su said, "This is a group with small numbers. Whoever is number 2, stay here and be in the same group as them." Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohua's face was full of regret. Yu Dei, on the other hand, stood out very reluctantly. Standing in the group of youths, she was a head taller than them. Zhang Xiaohua was secretly happy again. "Haha, who asked you to compete with me for the number?" Sheng Guanyun's situation was the same. However, his group of youths were obviously younger and shorter. Shang Guanyun was also from a tall family. In the end, only Zhang Xiaohua followed Steward Su to a corner. In fact, when she saw Shang Guanyun's group, Zhang Xiaohua had an ominous feeling in her heart. Moreover, looking at the age and height of each group, Zhang Xiaohua's premonition became stronger. When Steward Su stopped in front of a small ring in the corner, Zhang Xiaohua's heart immediately turned cold. Her premonition had come true. In front of her was a group of half-grown children who were shorter than her by a head. Looking at their faces that still had milk hair, Zhang Xiaohua secretly complained in her heart. Could it be that this group of children were only 7 or 8 years old? The two disciples who were looking after this group of children were about the same age as Steward Su. The two of them were tidying up their affairs. Steward Su said to them, "Old Li, Old Ma, these are the people from Huanxi Manor who are participating in the written examination. Take care of them." One of them raised his head in amazement and said, "Why is someone from Huanxi Manor in our group? Why don't we let him go to the first group?" Steward Su smiled and said, "It's the same no matter which group. Old Ma, his number is 250. He happens to be in your group." Old Ma looked at Zhang Xiaohua and shook his head, saying, "All right, if you say so, then so be it. Anyway, I don't care." Steward Su nodded at Zhang Xiaohua and said, "Then you'll be in this group and listen to Leader Ma's arrangement." Zhang Xiaohua hurriedly cupped her fists in thanks. Steward Su smiled and turned around to leave. Old Ma pointed to the group of children standing next to him and said to Zhang Xiaohua, "You go over and stand with them first. We'll be done here soon." Zhang Xiaohua responded and obediently stood over. Zhang Xiaohua stood among the children who were a head shorter than her. She looked left and right and felt very bored, so she called out in a low voice, "Little brothers." As soon as her voice fell, a child who looked a little older next to her looked at Zhang Xiaohua with clear big eyes and asked curiously, "Your surname is Chang?" Zhang Xiaohua was stunned and said with a smile, "Little brother, big brother's surname is not Chang. Big brother's surname is Zhang." When the child heard this, he immediately stopped smiling and said with a straight face, "Since your surname is not Chang, then don't call me little brother. Wait until your surname is Chang." Suddenly, Zhang Xiaohua's smile froze on her face. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry in her heart. She had just given a nail to that Jiang person, and now it was returned to her. She couldn't even say anything. Thus, Zhang Xiaohua said self-deprecatingly, "Could it be that there's no one with the surname Zhang here?" All the children were silent. The child with the surname Chang narrowed his eyes and said, "There is." When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she immediately asked, "Which one is it?" The child smiled and said, "There was originally one, but unfortunately, he ate secretly last night and had diarrhea this morning. He couldn't come to the competition, so you took this 250 number plate." Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but wail in her heart. Poor child, why did he have to steal now? How unlucky. Sigh, she didn't know if this unlucky child was referring to her. Or was it a child who stole food that she hadn't seen before? Not long after, Team Leader Ma and Team Leader Li finished preparing everything and walked over. They said to Zhang Xiaohua and the others, "All right, everyone is ready. This year's competition will be the same as previous years. Our group will have 10 people, and will follow a round-robin system. Everyone in the group will fight against the other 9 people. If you're knocked off the stage or can't fight back, you'll be considered to have lost. If you fight for more than an incense stick's worth of time, you'll be considered to have tied. If you win, you'll get 3 points, if you draw, you'll get 1 point, and if you lose, you'll get 1 point. Oh right, during the competition, you can't kill anyone. If you do, you'll automatically lose the right to compete. Also, you must pay attention to your strength and try not to injure others. If the other party has already admitted defeat or has lost the ability to fight back, you must immediately stop. If you injure someone, it will be considered a failure and a point will be deducted. Do you all understand?" All the children said, "Understood." Thus, Zhang Xiaohua's participation in the martial arts assembly competition officially began. Team leader Li lit an incense stick at the side and then counted 2 numbers. Immediately, 2 children walked out from the crowd and quickly walked to the front of the stage. With a leap, they displayed their light body techniques and leaped onto the stage that was as tall as a person. Seeing this scene, Zhang Xiaohua immediately understood why he felt awkward looking at those stages in the public square earlier. These stages didn't have ladders. Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but complain. What should he do? When it was his turn, how was he supposed to go up? However, the competition on the stage quickly made him forget about this problem. Valuing the enemy was the same as valuing oneself. From the beginning, Zhang Xiaohua had never dared to underestimate the Misty School opponents. Even when he had initially planned to participate in the martial arts assembly, he had always treated the Misty School opponents as his opponents. But just now, facing those children who were much younger than him and a head smaller than him, he really didn't have any thoughts of treating them as his opponents. To tell the truth, he had underestimated this bunch of Misty School children. However, the children on the stage had given Zhang Xiaohua a solid lesson. You can't judge a book by its cover, just like how the sea can't be measured with a pint pot. The 2 children on the stage, although they weren't old and weren't small, but when they displayed their martial arts, they weren't careless at all. One of his fists opened and closed, attacking openly. His fists were heavy and full of inner strength. The other one's light body techniques were excellent, like a swallow returning to the forest, a butterfly flying to the flowers, dodging left and right with ease. Seeing this, Zhang Xiaohua, who was below the stage, was dumbstruck. Were these still children who weren't even 10 years old yet? Looking at those ingenious moves and light footwork, could it be that they had trained hard for many years? Furthermore, looking at those fists which gave rise to the wind and his palms which were fierce, it was needless to say that they contained inner strength. Such a small wimpy child was able to cultivate such powerful inner strength mental cultivation methods. How could an ordinary person survive? However, Zhang Xiaohua had forgotten that the Misty School only recruited disciples once a year, and those who were recruited were all geniuses who were 1 in 10,000. How could an ordinary youth from the countryside like him compare to them? Furthermore, this Misty School's Young Eagle Hall was originally the cradle for nurturing the future disciples of the Misty School. They didn't participate in the affairs of the association. Most of the people in the hall were martial arts masters who had rich experience in educating people. They taught according to their aptitude, had a large amount of precious medicinal herbs, and also had rare inner strength mental cultivation methods, fist techniques, and a series of advantageous conditions. How could they not have such powerful martial arts? In fact, this was the real reason why the Lotus Flower Escort Agency and Huanxi Manor hadn't participated in the martial arts exhibition for decades. Most of the guards and escorts of the Lotus Flower Escort Agency had joined the agency with their skills. Their qualifications and conditions were absolutely incomparable to this group of talented youths. If they were to compete, it was really hard to say who would win and who would lose. As for Huanxi Manor, who could participate in the martial arts exhibition, they were naturally inferior to the Lotus Flower Escort Agency, and were at a disadvantage in the competition. After a long time, they even stopped participating. Alas, thinking about it, no matter who it was, they couldn't compare to a group of 10-year-old youths whose self-esteem wouldn't suffer a serious blow. Fortunately, Zhang Xiaohua had always been beaten down by others, so she didn't care about this time. No matter if it was a youth or a toddler, it was just a matter of one more blow or one less blow. Very quickly, the time it took to burn a stick of incense was up. The 2 children in the ring didn't have a clear winner, and leader Ma treated it as a draw. Following that, 2 more children entered the ring. The following match didn't end in a draw, but the strength of the 2 was almost the same. In the end, it was a child who looked slightly older who used a deceptive move to deceive his opponent's eyes. With a sweep of his leg, he kicked his opponent to the ground and won. The 3rd match was the child surnamed Chang. Zhang Xiaohua paid attention. That child used a set of palm techniques. He circled around his opponent and attacked. His opponent was obviously no match for him, and only used a set of fist techniques to meet his opponent. After a short while, he was exhausted and couldn't care less. He was ambushed by Chang Mao and stamped on his chest, forcing him to forfeit and surrender. After Chang Mao won, he wasn't complacent. Instead, he gave Zhang Xiaohua a provocative look before jumping down from the ring. Like a willow catkin, he landed without a sound. Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but admire him. What a wonderful qinggong. After watching the first 4 matches, Zhang Xiaohua had a general impression of the other 8 children in her group. There were 3 children who were the best, then there were 2 children who were slightly worse, and there were 3 children. Zhang Xiaohua felt that they were about the same as her, so they should be the worst. She didn't know how good the martial arts of the last child who would compete with her was. When Zhang Xiaohua looked at the child next to her, she found that he was also staring at her. Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but laugh. This little brat. However, why didn't he think about it? There were 10 people, and 5 of them had a place to advance. You just joined and wanted to snatch a place away. Furthermore, you wouldn't get any benefits from this place. If you could do such a thing that harmed others without benefiting yourself, why couldn't others stare at you? Following that, it was Zhang Xiaohua's turn to be the last 2 in her group. After that child received team leader Ma's nod, he immediately walked forward and with a flying sparrow hawk, he flew up the ring. His posture was very light, and it was obvious that his qinggong was quite good. Zhang Xiaohua, who was behind, secretly praised him in her heart. But looking at the 16 eyes beside him, they were probably used to seeing this. Zhang Xiaohua quickly walked to the front of the ring and looked left and right. From time to time, she touched her chin. Then, she walked to a corner under the ring and placed her palms on a support. She was about to climb up. Team leader Ma immediately shouted, "Number 250, what are you doing?" Zhang Xiaohua turned her head and said, "Team leader Ma, I'm going up the ring." Up the ring? Team leader Ma was also stunned and asked curiously, "Then why are you going below the ring?" Zhang Xiaohua had an innocent look and said, "I'm going to climb up. If I don't go below the ring, where else can I go? Your Misty School is really something. Such a high ring, why don't you set up a ladder or something? Our Lu Town's opera stage has a ladder." Bang! Team leader Chang almost fell on the spot. Then, with a trembling voice, he probed a little and asked in disbelief, "Number 250, don't tell me you've never learned qinggong before?" Zhang Xiaohua found it strange. She looked at team leader Chang and said, "I've never learned it before. What's so strange about it?" Team leader Chang stared at Zhang Xiaohua for a long time as if he was looking at a monster. He asked again, "Then how long have you been practicing martial arts?" Zhang Xiaohua tilted her head and thought for a while before saying, "About a year." Pooh! Team leader Chang spat out a mouthful of blood. "Oh, that's not right." It was a mouthful of turbid air. Then, he said weakly, "Then you dare to participate in the martial arts exhibition?" Zhang Xiaohua found it even more strange and said, "Why can't I participate? I won't get hurt or take anyone's life. I'm here to learn more." Team leader Chang was speechless. He waved his hand weakly and said, "Forget it, don't climb up. Who knows how many years have passed since our martial arts exhibition was founded? There has never been a contestant who climbed up the ring. You can be considered the first. In a while, I'll go find Steward Su. The rules of this martial arts exhibition need to be changed. Anyone who climbs up the ring will be considered to have forfeited." Chapter 170. Zhang Xiaohua immediately raised her hand and retorted, "Leader Chang, you are discriminating against martial arts." "I object." Discriminating against martial arts? Leader Chang was puzzled. Zhang Xiaohua continued, "Just because I don't know qinggong doesn't mean I can't participate in the martial arts competition. I also know other martial arts. Qinggong isn't good, but that doesn't mean other martial arts aren't good. Moreover, I think that those who practice external martial arts might not necessarily have good qinggong. Could it be that your sect Stone Ox also has good qinggong?" Yes. Stone Ox? Leader Chang laughed, you know Stone Ox? But let me tell you, although Stone Ox's Qinggong isn't good, when he was young, he jumped onto this stage by himself. At least he knows Qinggong. Ah. I see. Zhang Xiaohua was speechless. Leader Chang saw that Zhang Xiaohua was silent, so he asked, oh right, you also practice external martial arts? It doesn't look like it. Zhang Xiaohua said, I don't practice external martial arts. I also practice internal martial arts. Oh. Leader Chang nodded and said, come here, I'll send you up. Zhang Xiaohua walked over puzzled and asked, you'll send me up to the stage? How? Leader Chang waited for Zhang Xiaohua to come closer, then squinted his eyes and smiled. He exerted force on his feet and immediately got in front of Zhang Xiaohua. Zhang Xiaohua's vision blurred and Leader Chang grabbed her neck. Then she felt a strong force on her back and her body involuntarily flew towards the stage. Leader Chang's laughter came from behind, ha, I'll send you up to the stage like this. Zhang Xiaohua's body flew towards the stage like a cloud. Leader Chang saw this effect and was very satisfied. He had always been confident in his martial arts, so this little trick was nothing to him. But suddenly, he realized that something was wrong. Zhang Xiaohua's body didn't stop on the stage. Instead, she passed through the center of the stage and flew to the other side of the stage. Zhang Xiaohua's body didn't seem to have any signs of landing on the stage. Just then, Zhang Xiaohua's body flew across the stage and fell to the other side of the stage. What was going on? Leader Chang was also confused. When did his internal strength improve? Zhang Xiaohua, who was in the air, shouted, Leader Chang, what are you doing? You also tricked me. Leader Chang was speechless. Where did this come from? Then, he hurriedly ran to the other side of the stage to see how Zhang Xiaohua's body. Zhang Xiaohua's body was in midair. When she passed through the center of the stage, she felt that something was wrong. But she couldn't control herself. Seeing that she was flying across the stage and falling to the ground on the other side, she couldn't help but be anxious and shouted. After shouting, he suddenly had a flash of inspiration. He thought of the ethereal steps levitation technique and forgot He Tianqu's advice. Treating a dead horse as a living horse, he immediately followed the manual's instructions and executed it. But in the blink of an eye, his body had already landed. How could he make a last-minute effort? Just as he circulated his jinqi to stabilize his body, his feet had already touched the ground. However, fortunately, she stood there steadily and didn't look as miserable as she did in front of the misty school's archway. At this time, Leader Chang also rushed to her and asked, Number 250, what's going on? Zhang Xiaohua turned her head and asked, Leader Chang, I also want to ask you. You were discriminating in martial arts just now, and now you are discriminating against gangs. How did my Huanxi manner offend you? Why did you throw me here? When Leader Chang heard that she had risen to the height of the manor, he immediately changed to a smiling face and said, Number 250, I'm sorry. I was kind enough to help you up the stage. Who knew that I would be so lucky? Zhang Xiaohua frowned and said, If you want to help me, then help me. Just say that you will. Ah, you gave me a fright. Otherwise, I would have been mentally prepared. Leader Chang smiled apologetically and said, Okay, I'll help you up again. What do you think? Zhang Xiaohua nodded and said, Okay, I'll forgive you this time. You can start now. Leader Chang was much more cautious this time. He held Zhang Xiaohua's armpit and used his strength. He felt that his hand was quite light, similar to a 10-year-old child. He couldn't help but realize that when he used his strength just now, he used his strength according to his own estimation. How could he have known that Zhang Xiaohua's body would be so light? No wonder she flew out all of a sudden. This time, Leader Chang used very little strength. Zhang Xiaohua easily jumped onto the stage. When Zhang Xiaohua stood firmly on the stage, Leader Chang finally realized that he was helping Zhang Xiaohua up the stage out of kindness. Just now, Zhang Xiaohua's words sounded like he was begging her to go up. What was this? If you can't go up, then just give up. Why should I worry? On the stage, the 7 or 8-year-old child had been waiting impatiently for a long time. After all, he was still young. When he saw Zhang Xiaohua fly over the stage, land on the other side, and then come up from the other side, he was very puzzled. Now that he saw Zhang Xiaohua land on the stage, he immediately stood firm and cupped his fists in salute. I'm Mu Tangchun. Senior brother, please show mercy. Please. Seeing this, Zhang Xiaohua knew that this was the etiquette before the Misty School's competition. She had seen it in the previous 4 matches, so she quickly saluted and said, I'm Zhang Xiaohua. Junior brother, please. When Mu Tangchun saw that Zhang Xiaohua was ready, he didn't say anything more. He took a deep breath, opened his hands, and made a starting gesture. Then, he exerted force on his feet and pressed his palm to Zhang Xiaohua's chest. When Zhang Xiaohua saw this, she also raised her fist to meet it without hesitation. In the first move, both of them were testing each other's strength. Zhang Xiaohua knew that she was strong, but seeing that the opponent was a child, she didn't dare to go all out. She only used half of her strength. She thought that half of her strength would be 200 or 300 jin, so she would definitely be able to resist the opponent. Unexpectedly, when the fist and palm met, a strong force came from the small palm. Zhang Xiaohua was shocked and immediately thought that this was internal force. Alas, she was too careless. How could she forget that the opponent was a prodigy who was 1 in 10,000? Although he was young, his internal force had been practiced for many years. How could she underestimate him? But when the force from the palm came, Zhang Xiaohua increased her strength by 10%. Only then was she able to resist it. So Zhang Xiaohua had a plan in her heart. She didn't directly meet the opponent's palm for the second time. Mu Tangchun was the same. He seemed to know that Zhang Xiaohua's strength wasn't small, so he didn't fight head-on. So the two of them fought with 1 fist and 1 palm. At the beginning, the two of them were fighting fiercely. Zhang Xiaohua also met each of their moves with endless wonderful moves. But after a long time, the people in the audience could see the clues. Why? Zhang Xiaohua's 108 fist techniques were soon completely understood by others. Repeated moves continued to appear. On the other hand, although Mu Tangchun was young, he had learned a lot in his heart. After fighting with Zhang Xiaohua for nearly half an incense stick's time, he didn't see any repeated moves. From the palm technique at the beginning to the fist technique later, to the leg technique now, it had always been dazzling. Zhang Xiaohua sighed as she fought. The ancient people said that heroes came from the youth. However, although Zhang Xiaohua's moves weren't good, the power of the moves was still there. These fist techniques that had been changed into a mess by Zhang Xiaohua were still very wonderful in actual combat. The attack and defense were watertight. Although Mu Tangchun constantly changed his moves and tried to find Zhang Xiaohua's flaws, he didn't make any progress for a while. Mu Tangchun's eyes caught sight of the half-burnt incense stick. His legs exerted strength and he leaped up high. His left leg kicked towards Zhang Xiaohua. It was the secret leg technique of the Misty School. Zhang Xiaohua didn't have much experience in fighting, but she still had some knowledge of palm and fist techniques. Seeing this leg technique, she couldn't help but want to dodge. She exerted strength on her left leg and her right leg slipped. Her body wanted to float to the side. Ethereal steps was casually executed. Just as Zhang Xiaohua executed ethereal steps, team leader Ma, who was watching from below the stage, couldn't help but let out a cry of surprise. He hurriedly turned his head to look at Team Leader Li. Team Leader Li was also looking at him. Hence, their eyes met and they exchanged a look of astonishment. They didn't hide the expression on their faces. It seemed like they had already recognized ethereal steps. The fist technique disciples of the fledgling Eagle Hall were different from other disciples. Their task was to teach the martial arts of the commoner disciples. Therefore, they must know the martial arts of the sect like the back of their hand. Although the ethereal steps was a divine technique of the sect, they naturally couldn't be taught. However, this didn't mean that they hadn't seen it before. On the contrary, they had even seen the ethereal seven swords and the ethereal divine technique. Zhang Xiaohua participating in the martial arts exhibition as a disciple of the Huanxi manner was already rare. When she said that she had just learned martial arts for more than a year, Leader Ma naturally didn't think much of it. In addition to the disturbance in the arena, Zhang Xiaohua's image in Leader Ma's mind had already fallen to the lowest point. However, Zhang Xiaohua's performance in the arena was a new experience for Leader Ma. This guy, what kind of moves did he use? This seemed to be the Arhat fist, that seemed to be the Six Harmonies fist, and that seemed to be the Southern fist, and that also seemed to be the Jeet fist. In short, after fighting for a long time, Leader Ma didn't see a single fist technique that he was familiar with. However, these random fist techniques were used by Zhang Xiaohua with great vigor and vigor. His offense and defense were excellent, causing his opponent to be unable to find a good way to attack. In addition, what kind of foresight did Leader Ma have? He had long seen that Zhang Xiaohua did not know any inner force cultivation method. Moreover, when the two of them exchanged blows for the first time, he had seen it with his own eyes. He also knew how Mu Tongquan's inner force was. When he saw that Zhang Xiaohua did not lose out in the exchange of blows, he knew that Zhang Xiaohua's arms had extraordinary strength. However, this didn't make him look at Zhang Xiaohua with a whole new level of respect. With just these, Mu Tongquan wasn't a dish at all. As long as he continued to attack and wasn't afraid of exhausting his internal strength, he would definitely be able to force Zhang Xiaohua out of the arena. However, Zhang Xiaohua's use of the ethereal steps threw a huge stone in Leader Ma's heart and set off a huge wave. What kind of cultivation method was the ethereal steps? It was the ultimate cultivation method of the Misty School. As a disciple of the young Eagle Hall, he had never practiced it. At this time, a disciple of the Huanxi manner appeared. Leader Ma's heart immediately formed a thought: there must be something fishy about this. Just as Leader Ma was thinking, Zhang Xiaohua on the arena had already used the ethereal steps to dodge his opponent's many attacks. When Mu Tongquan saw that his leg technique wasn't effective, he no longer used it. He changed his moves and attacked Zhang Xiaohua with a fist technique. When Zhang Xiaohua saw the fist coming towards her, she was overjoyed. She met it head-on and still used the old Big Dipper magical fist. After fighting for a while, Mu Tongquan stole a glance at the incense stick. Seeing that the incense stick's time was about to be up, he couldn't help but feel anxious. This number 250 was too hateful. It was obviously a set of fist techniques over and over again, but he couldn't find any obvious flaws. He had changed a few sets of fist and palm techniques, but still couldn't succeed. It was easy to find that he couldn't deal with the leg technique, but the opponent used a very profound movement technique. His attacks didn't even touch the opponent's clothes. Seeing that the time was about to be up, could it be that he had to fight evenly with this opponent who appeared out of nowhere? He was faintly unconvinced. Thus, Mu Tongquan clenched his teeth and secretly used his mental cultivation method. A faint golden color appeared on his small face and flashed away. His small hand clenched into a fist and his body leaped into the air. He shouted loudly and fiercely attacked Zhang Xiaohua's face. Golden Sandalwood Fist. Leader Ma shouted in his heart and couldn't help but praise Mu Tongquan. However, he didn't have much hope for Mu Tongquan's attack. One must know that as long as Zhang Xiaohua used the ethereal steps, he would definitely be in an invincible position. However, the scene in front of him seemed to be out of his expectations. When Zhang Xiaohua saw Mu Tongquan's fist getting bigger and bigger, and was about to reach her, she also shouted loudly. She didn't use any moves, but her feet separated, and she got into a horse stance. Then, a fist went forward to meet it. With a pang sound, the two fists collided. Zhang Xiaohua took a step back and Mu Tongquan was also sent flying into the air. Mu Tongquan was also outstanding. His body was sent flying, but he didn't panic. He did a somersault and immediately stabilized his body. Using his feet to step on the pillar at the edge of the stage, he used his lightness skill to send another fist towards Zhang Xiaohua. Zhang Xiaohua laughed loudly and said, "Good, eat my fist too." At this time, Zhang Xiaohua seemed to have forgotten that her opponent was a 7 or 8-year-old child. Her body also rushed forward, and her arms exerted strength. Her fist went up to meet Mu Tongquan's fist. The two's fists collided, and in an instant, they collided 3 times. The audience below the stage heard 3 consecutive peng 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 sounds. Mu Tangchun was sent flying by Zhang Xiaohua's fist. He somersaulted a few times before stabilizing his body. His body lightly landed on the side of the stage, and Zhang Xiaohua also took a few steps back. Only when she retreated to the edge of the stage did she manage to stop. At this time, Leader Ma shouted from below the stage, "Time's up, it's a draw." At this time, Mu Tangchun had already changed his attitude of contempt. His eyes were full of surprise. The two walked to the center of the stage, saluted again, and then jumped down the stage. Fortunately, the stage wasn't too high. When Zhang Xiaohua jumped down, she only hesitated for a moment. As soon as Mu Tangchun jumped down from the stage, he was surrounded by the other 8 people. Needless to say, they were inquiring about Zhang Xiaohua's true strength. Everyone had seen the process of the competition, but they still had to listen to the words of the person involved to know their true feelings. Zhang Xiaohua jumped down the stage and silently walked to the side. Leader Ma looked at him with a complicated expression. He wanted to go over and say something, but he stopped. He thought that Zhang Xiaohua was upset because he didn't get all 3 points, so he didn't go over to comfort him. In fact, at this time, Zhang Xiaohua didn't think about what happened on the stage just now. She was thinking about how she felt when she was thrown over by Leader Ma just now. Didn't he Tianshu say that the levitation technique was just an incantation and that he couldn't use it? But just now, when he was anxious, he clearly used it successfully. Although he didn't float up, there was still a little bit of meaning. This was a fundamental difference. What was going on? If she could use the levitation skill, then she also knew Qing Gong. She could also go up this stage. Why did she have to be thrown up by her head? Thinking of this, Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but stare fiercely at the stage and Leader Ma below the stage. After a break, Zhang Xiaohua's group's competition continued. The next 2 rounds of competition were not much different from the first round. However, various fist techniques, palm techniques, and leg techniques appeared, which opened Zhang Xiaohua's eyes. Even Zhang Xiaohua's most anticipated Qing Gong technique was different for each person. Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but shake her head. The foundation of this misty school was too deep. As for Zhang Xiaohua's competition, the children already knew that he had great strength. Naturally, they didn't provoke him anymore. Although they used Qing Gong to avoid some of his powerful moves, they also knew that he wasn't familiar with leg techniques. In the beginning, several people used leg techniques to deal with Zhang Xiaohua. Zhang Xiaohua had to use ethereal steps to deal with them. But after 2 rounds, Zhang Xiaohua adapted to their leg techniques. She no longer just dodged, but used Big Dipper magical fist to meet the enemy. That repeated fist technique actually blocked the leg techniques. People couldn't help but say that it was a miracle. Thus, just like this, if Zhang Xiaohua used her ultimate move and used a powerful attack, her opponent would use Qing Gong to dodge. And if she encountered a martial art that Zhang Xiaohua couldn't block, Zhang Xiaohua would use ethereal steps to dodge. The result was very clear. Everyone was happy and obtained a point from each other. Thus, in Zhang Xiaohua's 9 matches, regardless of the opponent's martial arts, the exquisiteness of their fist techniques, or the depth of their inner strength, she fought with her opponent for a full incense stick's worth of time. Finally, she shook hands and made peace. This competition made Leader Ma below the stage depressed. He couldn't wait to grab Zhang Xiaohua's ear and say to him, "When you use ethereal steps, you only need to use a backhand punch to hit your opponent. With your strength, you only need 1 punch to win." But how would he know that once Zhang Xiaohua used ethereal steps, he would not be able to use Big Dipper fist? He had yet to properly merge the 2 martial arts together. Leader Ma felt that ethereal steps was like casting pearls before swine in Zhang Xiaohua's hands. He hated that Zhang Xiaohua was rotten wood that couldn't be carved. In the end, he didn't even have the thought of throwing Zhang Xiaohua onto the stage and almost threw Zhang Xiaohua out of the stage. By the time Zhang Xiaohua tied for the third time, the sky had already turned dark. Zhang Xiaohua jumped off the stage and the first thing she asked was, "Leader Ma, where are we going to eat?" Everyone below the stage fell to the ground with a thud. Chapter 171. As the saying goes, some people are happy while others are sad. Although Zhang Xiaohua wasn't very happy on the first day of the martial arts exhibition, at least she wasn't sad. As for the two brothers from the Lotus Flower Escort Agency, it was hard to say. Shang Guanyun's face was extremely unsightly as he stood below a ring. Looking at the group of youngsters, or rather children, who were a head shorter than him, who were chattering about their experiences on the first day of the competition, he felt an unusual bitterness in his heart. He finally understood the reason why no one from the Lotus Escort Agency had participated in this martial arts exhibition for decades. However, for this simple reason, the price he had to pay was really too great. Fortunately, the sky was already dark at this time, and no one paid attention to this young man who had lost 3 matches in a row. Otherwise, Shang Guanyun would rather make a crack in the ground and hide in it. Thinking about it, why did he listen to Yu Dai's instigation? Was it because of his curiosity that he got involved in this mess? Or was it because of his longing for the ethereal sect? Curiosity killed the cat. Since ancient times, countless examples had shown that impulsiveness and curiosity had a heavy price to pay. His cat hadn't been killed, but his self-esteem had been completely strangled. Thinking about the 3 matches he had just gone through, he had thought that his martial arts had already had some foundation. In addition, he had trained hard in the Lotus Flower Escort Agency's martial arts training center for nearly a year. Although it wasn't enough to deal with these children, he should at least have the strength to fight back. But the seemingly naive and childish children below were completely different people in the ring. They were merciless in the competition, their fists were skillful, their figures were graceful, and even their internal strength had reached a certain level. On the other hand, other than the last child who was slightly weaker, he had fought for half an hour before he was forced to the corner of the ring and had no choice but to raise his hand and admit defeat. The other 2 had all knocked him out of the ring within a few dozen moves. Thinking of this, Shang Guanyun shook his head slightly and said to himself, "This trip to the Misty School, it was a mistake. This is so embarrassing. But, I wonder how Yu Dai's results are." At this time, a small shadow flitted across his heart, but was immediately driven away by him. If he had been defeated so badly, what else could be said about the youth? He must have been beaten black and blue. On the other side, Yu Dai wasn't having an easy time either. He was number 2 and had to go up in the first round. Yu Dai had initially looked down on him. After all, he had his family's internal force cultivation method and had been practicing it for a long time. He also knew the power of this internal force. Wasn't it his fault that the Lotus Flower Escort Agency had crippled Zhang Xiaohua's hand? Therefore, when he entered the arena, he did not dare to use 10% of his inner strength. He only used 50%. But the Misty School youth opposite him didn't buy it and used 10% of his inner strength to compete with him. Although that youth was younger than Yu Dai and hadn't been practicing his internal force cultivation method for as long as him, he was talented and his internal force cultivation method was advanced. The depth of his inner strength was actually not much worse than Yu Dai's. Therefore, when Yu Dai saw that the situation wasn't good, he immediately focused 120% of his attention and used 10% of his inner strength to treat the youth in front of him as an equal opponent. Only then did they manage to be evenly matched. That youth saw that he didn't have the upper hand and immediately changed the rules of the competition. He used his Qinggong and an exquisite palm technique to fight with him. Yu Dai's moves weren't as exquisite as his opponents, and his Qinggong wasn't as agile as his opponents. He could only rely on his own deep inner strength and adopt a defensive stance. Only then was he able to steadily defend against his opponent's attacks for the time it took for a stick of incense to burn. When the team leader announced that it was a draw, Yu secretly let out a sigh of relief. If he had another half an incense stick of time, he would have definitely lost. Unfortunately, Yu was happy too early. Because he had used up too much of his inner strength in the first round, he hadn't fully recovered by the time he entered the arena again. And his opponent for the second round was even crazier. It was a youth who had deeper inner strength than Yu's previous opponent and whose moves were more exquisite. From the start, he didn't give Yu a chance to catch his breath. He immediately took the initiative and attacked non-stop. Yu's inner strength wasn't enough and his moves and body techniques couldn't compare to his opponent's. As he retreated to defend, he cried in his heart. "Brother, can you not bully me like this? Can you at least leave me some face?" However, his opponent didn't have any special abilities and didn't know what Yu was thinking. He only focused on attacking. Before a quarter of the incense stick had even burned, Yu was kicked out of the arena by his opponent. After falling out of the arena, Yu wasn't discouraged. He secretly hid the sadness of his defeat and hurriedly circulated his inner strength to recover his inner strength. He wanted to obtain all 3 points in the third round. Man proposes, God disposes. Yu's fate was actually already sealed when he drew the number plate with Zhang Xiaohua and Sheng Guanyin. Yu's third round was simply a replica of the first round. He was constantly suppressed by his opponent and could only breathe a sigh of relief after the time it took to burn a stick of incense. With 2 draws and 1 loss, Yu stood below the arena. As one of his fellow sufferers, he couldn't help but have the same thoughts as Sheng Guanyin. His self-esteem had suffered a huge blow. At the same time, he also thought that if he was like this, then what would happen to Sheng Guanyin and Zhang Xiaohua, who was half-baked and had a crippled right hand? However, Yu still had a different feeling in his heart. This Misty School was indeed a famous school. Even though he was just a commoner, he had such strength. He wasn't a match for him even though he had practiced for many years. If he could enter such a school to further his studies, then in a few years, his martial arts would improve by leaps and bounds. However, he was already old and his aptitude might not be much better than these youngsters who were much shorter than him. The Misty School might not make an exception and accept him. Thinking of this, Yu immediately thought of Zhang Xiaohu's figure in his heart. How could this country bumpkin catch the eye of the Misty School and become a disciple of the Misty School? Thinking of Zhang Xiaohu's country bumpkin appearance and then looking at his own clothes, Yu couldn't help but raise his head and look at the dark sky. From the bottom of his heart, he shouted, "Heavens, I'm so handsome, why don't you care more about me? Is it because I'm too handsome that you treat me this way? The heavens are really unfair. Why don't you send down lightning and strike those?" Just as he thought of this, he heard thunder in the sky. Yu's heart skipped a beat. Did the heavens hear his prayers? He then stole a glance at the youngster beside him. No one else seemed to be paying attention to him. Only then did he feel relieved. Suddenly, Yu had a malicious thought. If everyone else ate until they had diarrhea, then tomorrow wouldn't he? Yu secretly prayed again. Zhang Xiaohua, on the other hand, didn't have the same thoughts and worries as the other two. After a day of competition, he was a little hungry. Although the people from the Misty School didn't live a life of luxury, they were still favored by the heavens. After coming to the Misty School, their basic necessities were all arranged by someone and they didn't need to worry about it. Now that they heard Zhang Xiaohua ask such a stupid question, they couldn't help but lower the position of Zhang Xiaohua in their hearts by a few notches. Thus, Zhang Xiaohua's already bad image became even worse. The other youngsters all distanced themselves from him as if he wasn't in the same group as them. Team leader Chang didn't know his background. Looking at the strange gazes around him, he still braced himself and said, "Well, in a while, you can eat with us. I'm not too sure about your arrangements. If Steward Su comes to look for you later, you can make other plans." When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, his eyes lit up. He moved closer to team leader Chang and asked, "Then what are our standards? Is there red braised pork? I ate first-class meals at Huanxi Mountain Manor. Our Misty School shouldn't be worse than them, right? When team leader Chang heard this, he quickly distanced himself from him as if he wasn't familiar with him. He coughed twice and said, "Well, I don't know what's the difference between this and your Huanxi Mountain Manor's first-class meals. As for this red braised pork, I'm not sure if it was prepared today. We usually don't eat much of it." Zhang Xiaohua was a little disappointed and said, "You actually don't eat much red braised pork? Seems like the standards aren't high." Team leader Chang didn't know whether to laugh or cry and said, "That stuff is too greasy and it's easy to gain weight. It will affect the figure, so we don't eat much." Zhang Xiaohua suddenly understood and nodded, "So it's like that. But the red braised pork is very fragrant and is more delicious than the others." However, team leader Chang didn't seem to be in the mood to talk to him about this. He called team leader Li and the other disciples to pack up and leave. Suddenly, Zhang Xiaohua seemed to have thought of something and quickly walked in front of team leader Chang and asked, "Team leader Chang, can I ask you one more thing?" Team leader Chang took a step back and asked hesitantly, "Say it and see if I can answer." Zhang Xiaohua said mysteriously, "For people like us who came from outside to participate in the martial arts exhibition, can we walk around freely in the Misty School? Or if I want to go to other places to find familiar people, is that okay?" Captain Chang looked at Zhang Xiaohua's mysterious appearance and asked such a question. He almost vomited blood. He could only grit his teeth and say, "Well, I really don't know. Why don't you wait a moment? I'll send someone over to ask." After saying that, he waved his hand to a child who had competed with Zhang Xiaohua and said, "Mumu, quickly go find Steward Su and tell him about the problem of number 250. See how to deal with it." The child agreed and skipped away. Not long after, he came back and said, "Steward Su said that we can walk around freely in the Misty School. However, we can't go to some forbidden areas. There are also some places guarded by guards that are not allowed to enter. Also, we can't force our way in. In addition, the 3 people who came from outside to participate in the competition have already arranged accommodation. It's best to stay in the sect at night and rest early so that you can participate in tomorrow's competition on time." Team leader Chang nodded and turned to ask, 250, do you understand?" Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "I understand, Team leader Chang. Then I'll go find someone." Team leader Chang was bursting with joy and said, "What? You're not going to eat first? Let's eat first." Zhang Xiaohua shook her head and said, "Let's find someone first." "Oh right, where does sect leader O's direct disciple live?" Team leader Chang was startled and secretly thought, "See, I told you that there was something fishy going on. It was just as I expected. Fortunately, I didn't offend him just now." Thus, team leader Chang used an abnormally amiable voice and explained the route in detail. Zhang Xiaohua waited until she understood everything before bowing and taking her leave. Watching Zhang Xiaohua's departing figure, team leader Chang also let out a long sigh. The trouble had finally left on its own. At this time, the sky was already completely dark. However, the Misty School was still brightly lit. Many people were walking around in 2s and 3s. They were all excitedly talking about interesting news and experiences from the competition. Although team leader Chang gave a very detailed description of Zhang Xiaohu's residence, he couldn't stand up to Zhang Xiaohua's poor sense of direction. In less than a moment, she lost her way and didn't know where to go. However, the Misty School didn't lack warm-hearted people. Especially when they heard that Zhang Xiaohua was going to the direct disciple's residence, many people volunteered to personally send Zhang Xiaohua there. Zhang Xiaohua was covered in goosebumps from their attentiveness. She thought of the situation her second brother was in last time and hurriedly rejected countless people's good intentions. She expressed that she didn't dare to disturb their fun during dinner and that she would go alone as long as she told them the directions. Thus, under the resentful gazes of countless people and the helpless feeling of being rejected, Zhang Xiaohua took one step at a time and finally arrived near Zhang Xiaohu's residence. However, at this time, a group of female disciples walked towards her. Wasn't the one at the front of the group Minsue Hall's Aunt Qin and Hall Master Qin? Zhang Xiaohua's eyes were sharp and she had already seen them. She couldn't help but feel happy. She raised her hand and called out, "Big Sister Qin, Big Sister Qin." Aunt Qin led a group of young female disciples and was surrounded by the fiery gazes of male disciples. Naturally, she didn't notice Zhang Xiaohua among the countless people. At this time, when she heard someone call her, she was secretly puzzled. Who has the guts to call me that? When she saw the small and thin figure in the crowd, she was pleasantly surprised. "Zhang Xiaohua, why are you here?" Zhang Xiaohua walked forward and bowed. "I'm here to participate in the martial arts competition." Aunt Qin was surprised and asked, "You're not a disciple of our Misty School. How can you participate in the martial arts competition? Could it be that you can also advance?" Zhang Xiaohua explained the situation in detail. Only then did Aunt Qin understand. She said, "I really don't know about this. However, the martial arts competition has already been held for a day. How are your results? Even if you're only at the first rank of commoner clothing, the martial arts of those youths are still extremely powerful." When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she shrugged and shook her head slightly. When Aunt Qin saw this, she naturally knew that her results weren't good. She hurriedly comforted her. "Zhang Xiaohua, it's okay. If you lose, you lose. Just treat it as coming to see the world." "Oh, right. What are you doing now? Where are you going?" When she heard that Zhang Xiaohua wanted to find Zhang Xiaohu, she smiled and said to a female disciple behind her, "Chang'e, you know Zhang Xiaohua. Bring Zhang Xiaohua over. Don't let him find the wrong place again." That female disciple walked out of the crowd and looked at Zhang Xiaohua with a strange gaze. When Zhang Xiaohua heard that someone else knew her, she was surprised. When Chang'e walked out of the crowd of female disciples, she frowned slightly. Then she relaxed and said with a smile, "Yes, I know elder sister Chang'e. Aren't we just going together?" Aunt Qin didn't wait for Zhang Xiaohua to finish and immediately interrupted her. "It's good that you know Chang'e. Let her take you so you don't get lost again." Zhang Xiaohua laughed and said with a double meaning, "I know, elder sister Qin." Afterwards, she bid farewell to Aunt Qin and was led by Chang'e to Zhang Xiaohu's residence. Along the way, Chang'e was very curious about how Zhang Xiaohua had killed the black-clothed old man. After all, she had personally experienced that person's power and saw Zhang Xiaohua kill him with her own eyes. Ever since they returned from the south, the news of Yen down south had been strictly sealed. Even the news of Zhang Xiaohua coming back alive was only later found out by Chang'e. She had always been very curious about what kind of unique skills Zhang Xiaohua had that she wasn't afraid of the black-clothed old man's iron shirt and light golden palm. Today was such a coincidence that she was caught red-handed. How could she let Zhang Xiaohua go? Like a curious child, she asked this and that. Zhang Xiaohua had gone down south with her. Although they hadn't talked, they could be considered to have gone through trials and tribulations together. There was no need to keep Zhang Xiaohua's matters a secret from her. Thus, Zhang Xiaohua told her in full detail about what she had said and done with Elder Yu that day. Chang'e still didn't believe her. She opened her big round eyes and asked, "Is it really that simple?" It was that person's negligence. Zhang Xiaohua had an expression that said, "I knew you wouldn't believe me." She said, "It was originally like this. If I was powerful, I wouldn't have been able to tie 3 matches in a row today." Tie 3 matches in a row. When Chang'e heard this, she laughed out loud and said, "You're really good. When I was a commoner, I didn't hear of many people tying 3 matches in a row." As she spoke, Chang'e suddenly said, I was just talking to you. Aren't we already here? This is where the direct disciples live. Do you know where your second brother lives? If you don't know, we'll have to find someone to ask." Zhang Xiaohua thought for a moment and said, "There's a small tree in front of my second brother's courtyard. Look, that should be it. I came here once during the day, so I still have a bit of an impression of it." After saying this, Zhang Xiaohua led Chang'e to Zhang Xiaohu's courtyard. She smiled and pointed at the small tree, saying, "It's this small tree. There's no mistake. I can't recognize the road, but I still have an impression of the tree." After saying this, Zhang Xiaohua walked up and knocked on the door. It was still quiet inside. Chang'e said in a small voice, "Could it be that your second brother isn't here? Today is the day of my Misty School's martial arts practice. He must have gone somewhere to watch the fun. Or perhaps the sect leader had something to do and let him go." Zhang Xiaohua smiled mysteriously and said, "You don't know about this, right? Elder sister Chang'e, watch me." After saying this, she stopped knocking on the door. Instead, she pointed her mouth at the crack of the door and sang loudly, "Zhang Xiaohu, oh Zhang Xiaohu, your younger brother is Zhang Xiaohua. He asked me to ask you, are you still in the courtyard? Are you in the courtyard?" As soon as she finished singing, the door opened with a creak. A joyful voice came from inside, "Xiaohua, is that you? Why did you come at this time? Wasn't it Zhang Xiaohu who walked out of the door?" Zhang Xiaohu saw that the person in front of him was his younger brother. He was very surprised. He walked over and rubbed his head, saying, "Why did you come here now?" Zhang Xiaohua said with grievance, "Don't keep rubbing my head. It'll affect my growth. By the way, I didn't come here alone." "Really?" Zhang Xiaohu was surprised. He raised his head and looked outside, asking, "Who else is there? Is it Li Jinfeng, young Master Li?" Chapter 172. Looking up, Chang'e was standing not far away, looking at the two brothers with a beautiful smile. The female disciples of the Misty School were outstanding. Every one of them was incomparably beautiful and had an extraordinary temperament. Chang'e was dressed in a tight suit, looking particularly valiant in the dark night. At this time, a crack suddenly appeared in the dark clouds in the sky. The bright moonlight shone down on Chang'e's body. Under the moonlight, Chang'e saw Zhang Xiaohu looking at her. She pursed her lips and walked up to him. Zhang Xiaohu suddenly felt an electric shock in his heart. He felt a burst of heartache, followed by a burst of heat. His eyes stared at Chang'e, and he could no longer speak. Zhang Xiaohua did not notice her second brother's appearance. She hurriedly greeted Chang'e and said, "Sister Chang'e, this is my second brother, Zhang Xiaohu. He is now Hero Wen's disciple." Her words were full of infinite pride. Chang'e smiled and walked up to Zhang Xiaohu. She saluted and said, "Hello, Zhang Xiaohu. I don't know if I should call you junior brother or senior brother. In fact, according to the rules of the Misty School, the first to enter the door is the elder." Zhang Xiaohu really did have to call Chang'e senior sister. However, the disciples of O Peng's line also had some special characteristics. Sometimes, the seniority was also determined by age. However, in Zhang Xiaohu's case, entering the Misty School at such an old age was rare, so Chang'e asked this question. Zhang Xiaohu looked at Chang'e's face, which was as beautiful as a flower. He opened his mouth, but didn't know what to say. Based on his usual personality, he would probably call her senior apprentice sister out of humility. But in front of this girl, he couldn't bring himself to call her senior apprentice sister. Seeing this, Zhang Xiaohua was very puzzled. She said to Chang'e, "My second brother is older than me by 5 years. He should be 19 this year. Sister Chang'e, how old are you?" Hearing this, Chang'e smiled and said, "In that case, your second brother should be older." After that, he cupped his hands and saluted Zhang Xiaohu, "I am Chang'e of Mingsui Hall. Greetings, senior martial brother." Seeing that Chang'e was so generous, Zhang Xiaohu was even more delighted. He also saluted and said, "I'm Zhang Xiaohu. Greetings, junior sister Chang'e." After the two saluted, Chang'e asked, "Senior martial brother, are you the disciple who recently joined the sect?" These words were very vague, but Zhang Xiaohu understood and nodded with a bitter smile. Chang'e smiled and said, "I was wondering why there was a rumor recently that a disciple relied on nepotism to join the Misty School's direct disciples. I was very puzzled. Our boss O isn't a person who only listens to one side. How could he make such a mistake? Now that I've seen Zhang Xiaohua, I know the reason. Zhang Xiaohu didn't quite understand. Zhang Xiaohua hurriedly explained, elder sister Chang'e and I went out with our manor lord O. That's how we met. Zhang Xiaohu also suddenly understood. He hurriedly opened the door and said, this isn't the place to talk. Junior sister Chang'e, please come in. Chang'e waved her hand and said, no need, senior martial brother. The hall master told me to bring Zhang Xiaohua here. I still have to hurry back. There's a competition tomorrow, so I have to go back early to prepare. Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohu hurriedly said, I heard that the competition at the martial arts exhibition is very important. Junior sister should go back early. I won't invite you in for a chat. Chang'e saluted the two again and turned to leave. Zhang Xiaohu suddenly asked, that, junior sister Chang'e, where will your competition be tomorrow? Hearing this, Chang'e covered her mouth and laughed, our Mingsui Hall's competition will naturally be in the hall. You male disciples aren't allowed to watch. Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but feel embarrassed. He scratched his head. Chang'e looked at Zhang Xiaohua and said, isn't Zhang Xiaohua also competing tomorrow? You can go and cheer him on. I'll see if tomorrow's competition ends early. If it ends early, I'll also go to the Young Eagle Hall to cheer Zhang Xiaohua on. Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohu was overjoyed. He watched Chang'e leave. After Chang'e left, the two brothers entered the courtyard. Without waiting for Zhang Xiaohua to sit down, Zhang Xiaohu impatiently asked, Xiaohua, why are you also participating in the martial arts exhibition? Zhang Xiaohua had no choice but to be patient and tell him the whole story again. Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohu couldn't help but feel uneasy. He said, Xiaohua, how can you do as you please? No matter what, you have to discuss this with me. Zhang Xiaohua stared blankly and asked in puzzlement, what's there to discuss? Isn't it just a martial arts competition? Zhang Xiaohu stamped his feet and said, Xiaohua, you didn't stay in the Misty School. You don't know how powerful the Misty School is. When I was in the Lotus Flower Escort Agency, I felt that my aptitude wasn't good enough. As long as we have the will to endure hardships, we won't be worse than others. Zhang Xiaohua said, that's right, second brother. I also feel the same way. Zhang Xiaohu bitterly smiled and said, I've gained a lot of knowledge during my time in the Misty School. Let's not talk about the level of brocade clothing and the high level of cloth clothing. Let's just talk about the level of cloth clothing that you're participating in. I've actually seen a few young disciples compete. I won't hide it from you, my self-esteem has taken a big hit. I feel that the martial arts that I've learned is simply not a match for others. Think about it, a child whose height just reaches my chest has better martial arts than me, and whose internal strength is higher than mine. If I were to be beaten down in the arena, where would I put my face? Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohua slightly frowned and interrupted her second brother, saying, Second brother, I think what you said is wrong. What does this martial arts competition have to do with face? If you don't compete for the sake of face, then your martial arts will never improve. As the ancients say, the one who reaches the top is the teacher. It doesn't matter if the other person is young or old, as long as there is something that we can learn from them, we should humbly learn from them. What do you think, second brother? When Zhang Xiaohu heard this, his face turned slightly red and he said in a low voice, what you say makes sense. However, he immediately put on a straight face and said, but why are you participating in this martial arts competition? I know your martial arts foundation. If it's just to learn, you can let Captain He and the others teach you properly first. It won't be too late to participate after 3 to 5 years of practice. Who can you beat right now? How can you learn anything from it? When it came to the results of the competition, Zhang Xiaohua didn't say anything more. After all, he was still a youth. When he reprimanded Zhang Xiaohu just now, he spoke with conviction. In fact, wasn't he the same as well? Otherwise, he wouldn't have wanted to be in the same group as those tall disciples. When Zhang Xiaohu saw that his younger brother wasn't speaking, his heart ached as he asked, did you not win a single match today? Zhang Xiaohua could only nod his head. Zhang Xiaohu patted his head and comforted him, "It's okay, Xiaohua. Our foundation is weak and can't compare to them. Didn't I just say that as long as we have the heart to improve and cultivate hard? If we can't do it this year, there's still next year. If we can't do it next year, there's still the year after." When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, he vigorously nodded his head. Just as he was nodding his head, he heard Zhang Xiaohua's stomach rumble thunderously. Zhang Xiaohu smiled and said, "I was wondering why you ran over to my place. So you haven't eaten yet? Come, let's go and try our food." With that said, he pulled Zhang Xiaohua out of the small courtyard with his head held high. After eating, Zhang Xiaohua rubbed his stomach as if he hadn't had enough. He followed second brother to the tidy and lively main road of the Misty School. Zhang Xiaohu looked at his younger brother and was very happy. He smiled and asked, "Xiaohua, I remember that you like to eat red braised pork. Why didn't you eat more just now? Also, I feel that your appetite is a lot smaller than before. You're growing now, so you have to eat more." Zhang Xiaohua looked at the lush flowers and said, "Second brother, I don't know what's going on either. It's just that I feel like I'm full after eating for a while. Just like today, if it wasn't for the fact that the competition exhausted my energy, I would have eaten even less at night. The red braised pork tastes okay, but the more I eat, the more I get sick of it." Zhang Xiaohu thought for a moment and said, "Maybe it's because you eat better now, so you don't like to eat anymore. If it was at home, you would eat faster than anyone else." At the mention of home, the two brothers were a bit sad. Zhang Xiaohua asked in a small voice, "Second brother, I want to go home and take a look. What about you?" Zhang Xiaohu nodded and said, "I also want to. We've been out for more than a year, so we should go back and take a look." Although young Master Li has already reported back to the family that he's safe, Mom and Dad still miss us when they don't see us. Zhang Xiaohua looked at Zhang Xiaohu and said, "Then when can we go back?" Zhang Xiaohu thought for a moment and said, "Let's wait a bit. You should be able to go back at any time." Zhang Xiaohua quickly said, "Yes, I don't have much to do. It's just that a while ago, I couldn't leave. Captain He and the others are going to participate in the martial arts exhibition, so I'll keep an eye on the medicinal field for a while. After the martial arts exhibition, they'll go back and I'll be relaxed. I should be able to go back at any time." Zhang Xiaohu muttered, "I'm a bit troubled here. I've only just entered the Misty School, so I haven't fully grasped the habits of my master and the others. At first, they just let me familiarize myself with the environment of the school. I reckon that after the martial arts exhibition, they'll only be able to teach me specific martial arts. So, I don't dare to easily ask for leave from master." Zhang Xiaohua nodded and said, "I know, second brother. How about I wait for you? When we go back, it's better if the two of us go back together. If one of us goes back alone, Mom and Dad will be even more worried." Zhang Xiaohu looked at Zhang Xiaohua with a slight smile and said, "Xiaohua, you've also grown up." Zhang Xiaohua proudly raised her little head and said, "That's right, second brother. I'm already 13 years old, of course I'm an adult." The two of them chatted like this as they walked back. When they were about to reach Zhang Xiaohu's residence, Zhang Xiaohua suddenly thought, "Second brother, do you know where the medicine hall is? I want to go see Captain He and Nie Xiaoer." Zhang Xiaohu looked at the sky and shook his head, "Forget it, don't go today. It's already late and they're all going to participate in the martial arts exhibition. They're probably cultivating right now. Even if you go, you won't be able to see them. You'll be disturbing them for no reason. Also, don't you have a competition tomorrow? You should go back and rest early. Rest well. Even if you lose tomorrow, you have to use all your strength to deal with it." "I-oh." Zhang Xiaohua cried out and said, "Second brother, I forgot that when I left Kitty Hawk Hall, Steward Su said that he had already reserved a room for me. I didn't ask clearly either. Can I not go back tonight? It's already so late, what should I do?" Zhang Xiaohu thought for a moment and said, "It's already so late, who are you going to ask?" I don't know where this Steward Sue is, but I do know the general location of Kitty Hawk Hall. Forget it, I'll just make do with my place tonight. When I see them tomorrow, I'll properly explain. Zhang Xiaohua thought for a moment and nodded, that's the only way. I hope there won't be any problems. The two brothers chatted as they returned to the small courtyard. Zhang Xiaohu hadn't received any teachings from his master yet. Presumably, Wen Wenhai was thinking about what martial arts to teach Zhang Xiaohu. Moreover, Wen Wenhai had already stopped Zhang Xiaohu from practicing the trash martial arts that he had learned at the Lotus Flower Escort Agency. Therefore, Zhang Xiaohu could only practice fist techniques and the like. Thus, the two of them each occupied a corner in the small courtyard and began to practice on their own. After Zhang Xiaohu finished practicing a set of fist techniques, he saw that Zhang Xiaohua was still practicing. He stood there with a chuckle and happily watched his younger brother practice. Very quickly, he discovered that Zhang Xiaohua was practicing that set of fist techniques over and over again. He felt that it was very strange, but immediately after, his heart was moved again and he shouted, "Xiaohua, stop. Let's spar for a bit." Zhang Xiaohua paused for a moment and happily said, "Okay, second brother. Wait a moment. I'll practice a few more times and then stop." After practicing enough times, that bone-tempering cold stream appeared and Zhang Xiaohua stopped. Zhang Xiaohu felt very strange and asked, "Xiaohua, why do you practice the same set of fist techniques over and over again?" Zhang Xiaohua didn't understand and said, "There's nothing strange about it. Second brother, I only know how to practice this set of fist techniques. If I don't practice it over and over again, what am I practicing?" Zhang Xiaohu explained, "You don't understand what I mean. I know that you only know this set of fist techniques. What I'm saying is, when I told you to stop, why didn't you stop? Instead, you practiced several times before stopping." Zhang Xiaohua thought for a moment and said, "It's like this, second brother. When I practice this set of fist techniques to a certain number of times, there will be a cold stream flowing through the bones in my body. If I don't practice it to a certain level, it won't appear. That's why I have to practice it over and over again." Eh? Zhang Xiaohu's eyes widened and asked, "Really? This set of fist techniques that you put together?" Zhang Xiaohua listened to her small chest and proudly said, "Really, second brother? Do you want me to teach you and you can try it?" Zhang Xiaohu didn't suspect that his brother was lying. However, Zhang Xiaohua was currently participating in the martial arts competition. Moreover, he had just entered Misty School and would probably be practicing new martial arts soon. Where would he have the time to practice other things? Thus, he could only shake his head and regretfully said, "Forget it. Right now, I don't have the time to learn more martial arts. Let's wait until Master teaches me Misty School's martial arts." Zhang Xiaohua didn't manage to show off her toy. She pouted and said, "All right then. When you want to learn, come find me." Hee hee. Then, Zhang Xiaohua got into a stance and said, "Come, second brother. Let me try your martial arts." When Zhang Xiaohu heard this, he was also happy. He rolled up his sleeves and said, "All right. Watch my Lyoha fist." Thus, the two brothers stepped forward and began to spar. When the two brothers sparred, they naturally wanted to give way to each other. Zhang Xiaohu knew that Zhang Xiaohua didn't know how to use internal energy, so he didn't use any internal energy in his moves. On the other hand, Zhang Xiaohua knew that Zhang Xiaohu's strength wasn't as great as hers, so she only used 30% of her strength. In short, the two of them sparred harmoniously. Zhang Xiaohua didn't even use the ethereal steps. The two of them sparred for a while. Zhang Xiaohua was actually able to counter every move he made. He fought meticulously. Although Zhang Xiaohu was unable to gain the upper hand several times, he felt very gratified. He knew very well that his younger brother was actually not at a disadvantage in this fist technique. Naturally, he must have put in a lot of effort in his daily practice. The two of them sparred for a while. Zhang Xiaohu saw that it was getting late and stopped. He smiled and said, "Xiaohua, you've improved a lot. I almost can't beat you. Zhang Xiaohua's little tail stuck up. She smiled and said, don't you know whose brother I am? Can't I? Zhang Xiaohu chuckled and said, it's a pity that your internal energy isn't good enough. Otherwise, you could really exchange a few moves with those young Eagle Hall disciples. Zhang Xiaohua wasn't happy and said, it's just that we didn't have this opportunity when we were young. Otherwise, I wouldn't be worse than them. Zhang Xiaohu comforted her and said, okay, let's not talk about this anymore. Slowly improve. There will always be time to catch up with them. Come on, let's go inside and sleep. It's late and you still have to participate in the competition tomorrow. Zhang Xiaohu's small courtyard wasn't small and the house wasn't small either. However, there was only one Kong in the house. As a last resort, the two of them could only squeeze together. In fact, it couldn't be said that they had no choice. Presumably, even if there were two Kong beds, the two brothers would still squeeze together. The two brothers whispered for a while on the Kong bed. When Zhang Xiaohu spoke again, there was no sound from the other side. Zhang Xiaohu kicked Zhang Xiaohua but there was no response. He couldn't help but smile bitterly and say, this kid is still sleeping as soundly as before. Thus, Zhang Xiaohu also closed his eyes. After a while, he peacefully fell asleep. In the whole house, there were two breathing sounds, one of which had a very strange frequency. It was Zhang Xiaohua's unique 9 shallow and 1 deep breathing. Zhang Xiaohua's carefree heart sutra quietly ran again when he was asleep. In the endless night sky, the ethereal star force came as expected and invisibly covered Zhang Xiaohua's whole body. It was slowly guided into the pores of his whole body and then into his meridians to be refined. Tonight's star force was also different from the past. The star force projected for a long time and even attracted a trace of chi of heaven and earth above the misty school. Following the star force's trajectory, it was also guided into Zhang Xiaohua's body. The amount of chi of heaven and earth was also several times more than that of Huanxi Villa. It was guided into Zhang Xiaohua's pores by the star force. After being guided and refined by Zhang Xiaohua, it was constantly integrated into the genuine qi that was cheerfully flowing in his body. Every time the genuine qi flowed a circle, there would be a slight increase. Although the increase was insignificant, after a night of hard work by Zhang Xiaohua, he could feel a slight change. Chapter 173. When he woke up in the morning, Zhang Xiaohu opened his eyes and saw an infinitely magnified face staring at him seriously. The corners of that face still had some excrement. Zhang Xiaohu was so scared that he didn't see who it was and hurriedly hid behind. When he was far away, he realized that it was his younger brother, Zhang Xiaohua. He was holding his chin and looking at him with a playful expression. Zhang Xiaohu hurriedly touched his face and rubbed his eyes. He asked, is there something on my face? Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, there isn't anything on your face, but there is on your mouth. When Zhang Xiaohu heard this, he couldn't help but touch his mouth. He said in surprise, how is that possible? Zhang Xiaohua didn't directly answer his question. Instead, she said, second brother, what did you dream of yesterday? Dream? Zhang Xiaohu slightly frowned and said, no, I didn't dream of anything. Hee, you haven't dreamed yet. Zhang Xiaohua said with a mischievous smile, if you didn't dream, why did I hear you call someone's name? Who? Whose name? How come I don't know? Zhang Xiaohu was still confused. His dream was vague, how could he remember so much? When Zhang Xiaohua heard that her second brother didn't admit it, she stood up and looked at the sunlight outside the window. She said seriously, that's strange. This morning, someone in his dream called Junior Marshall's sister Changa, Junior Marshall's sister Changa. Could it be me? Zhang Xiaohu's face suddenly turned red. He couldn't help but mutter, this, is it true? Zhang Xiaohua said with a smile, the ancients said that a gentle and graceful woman is a good match for a gentleman. It's nothing. Zhang Xiaohu's face turned red. He also didn't know what to say. Then, he thought for a moment, clenched his teeth, and asked, "That, Xiaohua, are you familiar with Junior Marshal's sister Chang'e?" Zhang Xiaohua tilted her head and thought for a moment before replying, "I don't know anyone that well. It's just that when I went out with the Manor Lord last time, we went together. We didn't talk much and just got acquainted with each other." "Oh, I see." Zhang Xiaohu was a little disappointed. Zhang Xiaohua blinked her eyes and said with a smile, "Although I'm not familiar with junior sister Chang'e, I'm very familiar with Hall Master Qin of Mingsui Hall." "Really?" Zhang Xiaohu was overjoyed, his eyes shining with hope. "Of course." Zhang Xiaohua declined to comment. After the two brothers finished their meal, Zhang Xiaohu was familiar with his younger brother's poor sense of direction. Since he had nothing to do anyway, he followed him to Kitty Hawk Hall. Just as they arrived at the main road in front of the hall, they ran into two acquaintances. It was Shangguan Yun and Yu Dei. Both of them didn't look good and were in the middle of whispering something. Zhang Xiaohu had already heard from Zhang Xiaohua last night, so he wasn't surprised to run into them here. He very naturally stepped forward and saluted them. Shangguan Yun and Yu Dei didn't neglect him either. They had already lost their arrogance at the Lotus Escort Agency and hurriedly returned the salute. Zhang Xiaohu knew that the two's performance yesterday wouldn't be ideal, so he didn't ask any questions. After exchanging greetings for a while, he went in. It wasn't easy for the two to run into Zhang Xiaohu, so how could he be willing to let them go? Leaving Zhang Xiaohua aside, he pulled on Zhang Xiaohu's sleeve and asked him about his recent situation. He also expressed his respect for him. Only then did he ask in a roundabout way how he had caught the discerning eyes of gang leader O. Zhang Xiaohu didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He only answered perfunctorily, how could he be willing to tell the truth? Zhang Xiaohua, the instigator, was squeezed outside by the two. She was all smiles as she watched the two's performance. After talking for a while, Zhang Xiaohu coughed twice and said, "My two dear friends, it's already late. Why don't you hurry inside and make your preparations? There will be a competition in a while. Although you don't need to advance, this is a hard-won opportunity. You should cherish it and exchange pointers with my sect's disciples. It will be very beneficial for your future martial arts progress." Shangguan Yun smiled bitterly and said, "Brother Zhang is wrong. I didn't know before. If I had known that the martial arts competition would be so difficult, I wouldn't have come back even if you beat me to death. Yesterday, I fought 3 rounds, but I didn't win a single one. I don't know where my face has gone. To tell the truth, if it wasn't for brother you holding me back, I would have returned to the Lotus Escort Agency yesterday." Yu Dei smiled and said, "Perhaps the strength of yesterday's opponent was too strong? Wouldn't it be even more unsightly if you were to withdraw after just 3 rounds? Let's wait and see today. Maybe there will be a change today." Shangguan Yun curled his lips and said, "Forget it. If I ran, then I ran. Who said anything about me? I didn't know either. What is there to lose face about? If I were to be thrown out of the ring by those little kids today, that would be the real shame." Zhang Xiaohu heard the two say this and was even more worried for Zhang Xiaohua. When he looked back, Zhang Xiaohua was looking around and didn't seem to care. He couldn't help but laugh at himself. This little brother of his had encountered many setbacks on the road of martial arts. Being thrown out of the ring was a small matter that he probably wouldn't take to heart. Under the urging of Zhang Xiaohu, the two martial arts masters of the Lotus Escort Agency whose self-esteem had been greatly damaged yesterday walked into the Young Eagle Hall step by step. As usual, the entrance of the Young Eagle Hall was guarded. Zhang Xiaohua and the other two all had number plates. Zhang Xiaohua didn't need to be said. Although she was much older than the disciples of the Young Eagle Hall, her height was about the same. The guards weren't good enough to see her age, so they passed after checking. Yu Dei and Shangguan Yun didn't look like disciples of the Young Eagle Hall at all. The guards naturally wouldn't let them in. Yu Dei could only tell them their identities. Fortunately, some of the guards knew about this matter that hadn't happened for decades, so they let them in. This small disturbance made Yu Dai and Sheng Wanyan's expressions very unhappy. Zhang Xiaohu showed his waist token. When the guard saw the genuine waist token, he was flabbergasted. Where did this junior brother come from? Why didn't he compete at his own place during the martial arts exhibition? Why did he come to the Young Eagle Hall to watch the show? If he wanted to watch the show, then wouldn't the big arena at the entrance of the meeting hall be 100 times more lively? However, looking at the two foreign contestants who were much taller and older than the disciples of the Young Eagle Hall, he more or less understood what was going on. When he entered the Kitty Hawk Hall, he saw that the square was filled with children's heads. Zhang Xiaohu could not help but laugh. What he saw was just a few people sparring, and he already felt a sense of fear. Facing so many children whose martial arts were much higher than his, if he did not have a thick heart, it would not be easy to face them. Yu Dai and Sheng Wanyan's thoughts were understandable. The three people's arenas weren't together, so Zhang Xiaohu naturally accompanied Zhang Xiaohua. The four people walked for a while and then cupped their hands in farewell. When Zhang Xiaohua arrived in front of her arena, team leader Chang and the others were almost all present. Zhang Xiaohu was afraid that his brother would make a mistake, so he went forward to greet the two team leaders and explained his identity. When the two team leaders heard that he was the direct disciple of the sect leader, they didn't dare to be negligent and quickly cupped their hands in return. In their hearts, they thought at the same time, inside story, there must be inside story. Zhang Xiaohu and the others naturally knew that he had entered the ethereal sect through nepotism. But today, he had accompanied his younger brother who knew the ethereal steps to the Kitty Hawk Hall. Anyone would have thought that there might be some unspoken rules involved. Zhang Xiaohu didn't know that the two opposite him had thought so much in the blink of an eye. He sincerely explained to the two team leaders that Zhang Xiaohua had gone to look for him yesterday. He hadn't seen his brother for a long time, so he stayed to talk for a while. Because of the delay, he didn't ask for the room's location, so he could only stay at his place. He asked the two team leaders to bear with him. When the two team leaders saw this, they laughed in their hearts. How could they not sell such a cheap favor? They roughly explained the rules of the martial arts exhibition. It turned out that the rules of the martial arts exhibition were that many people came to the Lotus Escort Agency and Huanxi Manor. The Misty School usually arranged food and lodging, but these two places weren't very far from the Misty Mountain Villa. Many people were still willing to return to their own residences. Therefore, the martial arts exhibition didn't restrict those who had to stay at the Misty Mountain Villa. Even if Zhang Xiaohua had returned to the Huanxi Manor last night, it was still possible. But today, no one would go to the Huanxi Manor to pick him up. He had to arrive at the Young Eagle Hall on time, or else he would be disqualified. When Zhang Xiaohu heard this, his heart was relieved. Zhang Xiaohua beside him was overjoyed and said, "That's great. Then tonight we'll go to the medicine hall to look for team leader He and the others." Zhang Xiaohu glared fiercely at him and said, "It won't be too late to talk about it after you win. If you still don't win, how can you face team leader He?" Zhang Xiaohua shrunk his neck and stuck out his little tongue, pretending to be afraid. Not long after, the second day of the martial arts exhibition officially began. According to the order of the number plates that had been arranged long ago, they went on stage one by one. Zhang Xiaohu suddenly asked, "Xiaohua, what's your number plate?" Zhang Xiaohua raised his number plate and said with a smile, "Number 250. Zhang Xiaohu curled his lips and secretly said in his heart, "This number is really 250. Then he asked again, "What about Yu Dai and Sheng Wanyan?" Zhang Xiaohua said without hesitation, "Number 2, and number 111. Zhang Xiaohu nodded. "Hee, how many numbers, really 2? On the stage, the two children's fists and feet created wind as they fought. The thrilling scene made Zhang Xiaohu stunned. Was this still the martial arts of children who weren't even 10 years old? Why was it so much more powerful than the last time he saw it? However, after thinking for a bit, he understood. The fighting outside the stage was just to compare notes on martial arts. It didn't involve any benefits. Many of the unique skills and dangerous moves might not be used. But this martial arts exhibition competition really wanted to see the level of your martial arts. If he didn't show it now, when would he show it? Therefore, even if it wasn't a life and death battle, they would still go all out and not give in the slightest. The time it took for a stick of incense to burn passed quickly. The two people on the stage fought to a draw. Both of them were unconvinced and jumped off the stage, each taking 1 point. Zhang Xiaohua's number was at the end, so just like yesterday, his match was also at the end of each round. So he also stood beside Zhang Xiaohu and watched the competition on the stage. He didn't know how Zhang Xiaohua felt. Anyway, it wasn't just the first match. In the following 7 matches, there were wins and losses, but every match made Zhang Xiaohu feel relaxed and happy. The martial arts of these children were difficult for him to reach. It could be imagined that the depth of the bench of this misty school was very deep. Then he thought of the time when he and his younger brother rashly came to the Misty Mountain Villa to learn martial arts. At that time, he really didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Looking at the children in front of him and thinking of himself at that time, how could they accept him? At the same time, he felt ashamed of his inferiority and looked at Zhang Xiaohua, who was watching the competition attentively. His heart was filled with endless warmth. If it wasn't for his younger brother who he watched grow up from a baby boy, how could he enter the Misty School with such a high threshold? If he couldn't learn profound martial arts and gain a place in the Misty School where experts were everywhere, how could he face his younger brother? Suddenly, that shame was beaten away by his pride. He didn't have time to participate in the past of the Misty School, but the future of the Misty School was in front of him. He might as well give up his inferiority complex and shame, and use his blood and sweat in exchange for unlimited hope in the future. Just as he was thinking, he heard Captain Chang call out, 250, come on stage. Zhang Xiaohu's heart skipped a beat. His younger brother was going to go on stage, but he didn't hold any hope in his heart. How could Zhang Xiaohua be a match for a competition that even he felt ashamed of his inferiority? Thinking of Zhang Xiaohua's embarrassment yesterday, he thought that he would be thrown off the stage not long after going on stage. Thus, Zhang Xiaohu moved his feet, preparing to find a good place to catch Zhang Xiaohua, who would be thrown off the stage. But before he moved, he saw that Zhang Xiaohua beside him didn't move either. He couldn't help but say curiously, Xiaohua, they're calling your number. It's your turn to go on stage. At this time, Zhang Xiaohua seemed to have just made up her mind. She turned around with a bright face and said with a smile, second brother, come over and help me with something. Zhang Xiaohu asked curiously, help? What can I help you with? Don't tell me you want me to help you go on stage? Zhang Xiaohu hurriedly waved his hand. Not to mention whether Kitty Hawk Hall was willing or not, even if they agreed, he couldn't go up and embarrass himself. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, I'm not asking you to go on stage. I'm asking you to help me get on stage. Help you get on stage? Zhang Xiaohu was a little puzzled, but when he saw Zhang Xiaohua's opponent use a beautiful qinggong to leap onto the stage, he suddenly understood. With such a high stage, if no one helped, Zhang Xiaohua really wouldn't be able to go up. Zhang Xiaohu asked, then how can I help you? How did you go up yesterday? Zhang Xiaohua looked askance at the two team leaders and said, yesterday, Captain Chang threw me up. The first time, he actually threw me to the other side of the stage. Today, I can't let him help me. Second brother, help me. Just use your strength to throw me up. Use my strength? Zhang Xiaohu was greatly embarrassed. Brother, you're my blood-related brother. You can't harm people like this. You know that my internal strength isn't good, but you still want me to help you. Aren't you making me lose face? You could have just let the team leader throw me, why did you change the rules? Seeing that Zhang Xiaohu still didn't move, Zhang Xiaohua was a little anxious. She tugged on his sleeve and said, it's okay, second brother. You can just throw me. Even if you throw me like yesterday, I won't blame you. Zhang Xiaohu had no choice but to bite his ear and explain the situation. When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she frowned and said in the same voice, so it's like this, second brother. So your internal strength hasn't reached that level yet. What should I do? Zhang Xiaohu was so angry that he almost wanted to cover Zhang Xiaohua's mouth with one hand and choke him to death with the other. Can't you be a little quieter? Can't you see that when I'm talking to you, I'm leaning close to your ear? Zhang Xiaohua didn't care about other people's gazes. After thinking for a bit, she said, "How about this, second brother? Do you still remember when we used to steal bird eggs when we were young?" Zhang Xiaohu was even more anxious. "Why are you talking about stealing bird eggs now?" He said in a bad mood, "I remember." "What about it?" Zhang Xiaohua said, "Then it's just like before. Can't I just stand on your shoulder?" Zhang Xiaohu rolled his eyes at Zhang Xiaohua and said, "No. Can't I ask the team leader to go easy on you again?" Zhang Xiaohua stubbornly shook her head. Zhang Xiaohu saw that he couldn't win against her and could only accompany her to the front of the stage. The stage was about the height of a person. Zhang Xiaohua stood on Zhang Xiaohu's shoulder and her hands just happened to be placed on the edge of the stage. She only saw Zhang Xiaohua's hands exerting force and her small figure flew into the air with a peng sound. She then flipped a few hollow somersaults in the air before floating down to the ground. Zhang Xiaohua, this brat, had the intention of showing off. What a joke! This young master didn't know Qinggong. But this Qinggong movement and Qinggong techniques had been learned for 2 days. If she didn't use them, wouldn't others look down on her? Zhang Xiaohua's Qinggong came from the ethereal steps. She also wanted to show off. Her posture was naturally graceful and elegant. When this brat leisurely landed on the ground, the crowd came back to their senses and thought, "What are you doing?" If you had used your Qinggong from below the stage, everyone would have clapped their hands and praised you. However, looking at Zhang Xiaohu, who was gloomily walking back to the stage and trying to find a good angle to catch Zhang Xiaohua, how could they still praise you? Zhang Xiaohua closed her eyes and waited for a long time. Not hearing the sound of clapping, she was very puzzled. At this time, she heard the child opposite her say, "This senior brother, are you feeling unwell? You've already closed your eyes for a long time." Zhang Xiaohua opened her eyes gloomily. It seemed that the performance just now was a waste. No one appreciated it. Her song was too high to be deceived. So she said in a bad mood, "Can't you see that I'm resting? Wait a moment more." In fact, team leader Chang, who was below the stage, had the same thoughts as him. The only difference was that team leader Chang thought, this ethereal steps movement technique is so miraculous. Even a person who has never practiced Qinggong can move so gracefully. If I were to practice it, what would happen? He narrowed his eyes and looked at Zhang Xiaohu who was not far away. He thought, this brat actually did not practice any internal cultivation technique. I wonder what kind of divine martial arts he practiced. Looks like I should have a good relationship with him. Team leader Chang saw Zhang Xiaohu's unnatural expression and his eyes moved. He pulled over a disciple who had just competed and whispered a few words to him. That disciple was puzzled. He turned back to look at Zhang Xiaohua on the stage and quickly ran away. As for Zhang Xiaohu, he waited for Zhang Xiaohua to step on his shoulder and onto the stage before he slowly left the stage. He stole a glance at the people below the stage who had an expression of, "We don't know this person." He secretly wiped the sweat on his forehead. Sigh, how embarrassing. Luckily there weren't many people here. Just as he was thinking, he heard someone beside him say, "Senior brother Zhang Xiaohu, what were you doing just now? Please add it to your collection, thank you." Chapter 174. What he was afraid of would come. As soon as Zhang Xiaohu heard this voice, he immediately shouted in his heart, "Oh no! How could he let this person see his embarrassment? What should he do?" While he was thinking, the person had come to his side. It was his junior sister Chang'e, whom he had just met last night. Chang'e was still dressed in tight clothes and looked valiant. Beside her, there was a petite girl with big round eyes and a round face with baby fat, which made people want to love her. At this moment, the round eyes that could speak were staring at Zhang Xiaohu strangely, with a doubtful expression. Zhang Xiaohu wanted to make up a lie, but facing Changa's face, he couldn't tell a lie at all. In fact, Zhang Xiaohu forgot that in this square full of children, many people had seen his actions. Changa had seen it carefully from a distance, so it would be troublesome if he lied. Zhang Xiaohu thought for a moment and then said frankly, "It's nothing. I'm helping my brother to get on the ring." The round-faced girl asked softly, "Do you need help to get on the ring? Can't you just jump up with light skills?" Zhang Xiaohu looked at Zhang Xiaohua, who had just stood on the ring, and said, "My brother doesn't know light skills." The round-faced girl said again, "Nonsense. You saw his posture when he just turned over and got on the ring. How can he not know light skills? Besides, that night by the river, he..." Her words were really ambiguous. Zhang Xiaohu couldn't help narrowing his eyes. Was this his brother's acquaintance? At this time, Changa hurriedly interrupted the girl's words and said, "Chen Chen." The round-faced Chen Chen seemed to realize that she had let the cat out of the bag. She couldn't help but stick out her tongue and cover her mouth with her hand. Her expression was strange. Changa then introduced, "Senior brother, this is my junior sister. Her name is Chen Chen. She went out with Hall Master Qin last time." "Oh." Zhang Xiaohu suddenly realized that this was also one of the companions who went south with Zhang Xiaohua. Therefore, Zhang Xiaohu cupped his fists and said, "Junior sister Chen Chen, I'm Zhang Xiaohu, Zhang Xiaohua's second brother." Chen Chen hurriedly cupped her fists and said, "I'm Chen Chen. Greetings, senior brother." Then, she asked in disbelief, "Zhang Xiaohua, do you really not know Qinggong?" Zhang Xiaohu bitterly smiled and said, "Yes, he really doesn't know Qinggong. Yesterday, he was thrown up on stage by Captain Chang using his internal strength." As soon as Zhang Xiaohu finished speaking, he regretted it. Why was he so talkative? He should have just said that he did not know Qinggong. Why did he have to explain what happened yesterday? Sure enough, when Chen Chen heard this, he immediately said, "Senior brother, then why don't you use your internal strength to throw him up?" What he was afraid of really happened. Zhang Xiaohu was a little embarrassed and said with a red face, "Well, my internal strength is not good enough, so I can't throw him up." Chen Chen was even more puzzled and said, "Senior brother, you seem to be lying. You are older than us and have practiced internal strength longer than us. You can't be so weak that you can't even do this." "I can do this." Zhang Xiaohu was embarrassed and was about to explain when Changa beside him said, "Chen Chen, shut your mouth. No one will know that you are mute if you don't speak. If you ask again, I'll let you go back to Mingsui Hall now. In the future, I won't take you out. Brine and tofu, everything has its vanquisher." Chen Chen immediately shut her mouth and looked like an obedient child. Zhang Xiaohu's eyes were full of tears. What a bosom friend. She came to his rescue at the right time. If she asked again, he did not know how to answer. The more he looked at Changa, the more he liked her. She was really a considerate girl. Changa smiled at Zhang Xiaohu and said apologetically, "Senior brother, junior sister Chen Chen is like this. She likes to get to the bottom of things. I hope you don't mind." Zhang Xiaohu waved his hand repeatedly, indicating that he did not mind. But then, Changa asked again, "Just now, Zhang Xiaohua's posture of stepping on your shoulder looked very skillful. I guess you must have been a human ladder for your younger brother a lot, right?" When Zhang Xiaohu heard this, he chuckled and told Changa about how the two brothers went to the woods together to dig out bird eggs when they were young. Changa listened with curiosity and yearning in her eyes. Beside her, Chen Chen's little face was also red and she was eager to ask something. It was pitiful to say that although the disciples of the Misty School, such as Changa, were all favored by God and enjoyed the wealth of the world and the excellent treatment, their lives were mainly about practicing martial arts. However, they had no chance to enjoy the interesting things of Zhang Xiaohua's childhood. How could Zhang Xiaohu's description not arouse the curiosity of Changa and Chen Chen? Zhang Xiaohu was talking and suddenly stopped. He thought of something and quickly turned back. Sure enough, on the arena, Zhang Xiaohua had already fought with her opponent. Zhang Xiaohu hurriedly said, "Junior sister Chang'e, let's not talk about other things first. After Xiaohua's competition, let's talk about it." Chang'e also hurriedly said, "Okay, senior brother, let's watch Zhang Xiaohua's competition first." Zhang Xiaohua nodded and then said, "Well, junior sister, you stay here and I'll go over there." Chang'e was surprised and asked, "Why don't you stay together?" Zhang Xiaohu said, "You stay here and I'll stay there. If Xiaohua is knocked off the arena, we can catch him. He doesn't know Qin Gong and I'm afraid that he will fall and break." Knocked off the arena? Chang'e was very surprised and said, "How is that possible? I've seen Zhang Xiaohua's martial arts. Even if he was lucky to meet her last time, as he said, he should be able to defeat a child in plain clothes." "Impossible." Zhang Xiaohu said firmly, "Yesterday, he said that he didn't win a single match. He must be embarrassed to say that because he was knocked off the arena." Seeing that the other's point of view was too different from theirs, they didn't know who to listen to. At this time, Chen waved her hand aside, indicating that she had something to say. Chang'e nodded angrily and said, "If you have something to say, say it quickly. Don't be long-winded. Let's see Zhang Xiaohua's performance in the arena first and then decide what to do." Chen finished her words in one breath and then closed her mouth tightly. Zhang Xiaohu and Chang'e listened and nodded. They looked at each other and then looked at the arena. On the arena, Zhang Xiaohua was fighting fiercely with his opponent, and it was ridiculous. Yesterday, Zhang Xiaohua's opponent in the first round was Mu Tangchun. His internal strength was the best among the 9 children. According to him, yesterday, he used all his internal strength in the last 3 punches without any reservation. But even so, he didn't gain any advantage against Zhang Xiaohua. Moreover, when he was talking with these friends last night, he repeatedly emphasized that Zhang Xiaohua's strength was not limited to this. He felt that Zhang Xiaohua still had at least 30% of his strength. This news was also confirmed by the other 2 children who fought with Zhang Xiaohua. Every time they fought with Zhang Xiaohua, their arms would be numb and their wrists would be sore because of Zhang Xiaohua. Therefore, today, when they fought with Zhang Xiaohua, they used 100% of their strength to fight with him. But as long as Zhang Xiaohua really used 100% of his strength to fight with them, they would immediately dodge. Therefore, on the arena, it was funny again. First of all, unlike Zhang Xiaohu's imagination, Zhang Xiaohua didn't have any strength to fight back. On the arena, Zhang Xiaohua and his opponent exchanged punches and kicks, and the fight was very lively. Even when Zhang Xiaohua was angry and used all of his strength to fight with his opponent would dodge and not take it head-on. Of course, it was also not what Chang'e imagined. Zhang Xiaohua was a wolf who could take advantage of everything. Although Zhang Xiaohua's strength was great and his fists were hard, his moves were limited and couldn't be compared to the Misty School's disciples. However, he also had his own way of defense. Whenever his opponent's moves were ingenious and he couldn't deal with it, Zhang Xiaohua would use ethereal steps to dodge and make his opponent miss all of his moves. As a result, there was such a funny situation on the arena. Whenever his opponent forced Zhang Xiaohua into a dead end, his opponent would immediately use lightness skill to dodge easily. And whenever Zhang Xiaohua was forced into a dead end by his opponent's ingenious moves, he would immediately use ethereal steps to dodge easily. As a result, when the time for an incense stick to burn was up, the 2 of them were still tied. This was the first time Chang'e and Chen had seen such a bizarre and hilarious situation. They were truly astonished. Their faces were full of wonder and their hearts were filled with questions. Although the young man's fist technique was experienced and his footwork was profound, there was no internal force surging between his moves. His moves were also repetitive. If they went forward with a sword, they would certainly take his life within a few moves. Was this young man the same Zhang Xiaohua who saved many lives in the dark of night and killed a martial arts master with a single move? Zhang Xiaohu was even more incredulous. How was this possible? How could he not know Zhang Xiaohua's level as his brother? Last year, He was still recuperating in his room in the escort agency. His finger bones were shattered by Yudei's internal force. How could he be so powerful after not seeing him for a few days? Although Zhang Xiaohu was not good at martial arts, he had learned with Yudei in the martial arts training center in the escort agency. Naturally, he was aware of Yudei's level. None of these children in the Misty School were worse than Yudei. How could his brother, Zhang Xiaohua, be on par with them? Was this young man still his younger brother who stood on his shoulder and dug out bird eggs when they were young? When Zhang Xiaohua lightly jumped down from the arena and went to greet Chang'e, the three of them came back to their senses. Chang'e looked at Zhang Xiaohua as if he had just woken up from a dream and quickly introduced Chen Chen. Chen Chen had gone to the south with Zhang Xiaohua, so Zhang Xiaohua naturally remembered her. However, at that time, Chen Chen was a female disciple of Mingcue Hall and followed to protect O Yan. How could she meet Zhang Xiaohua, who was like a servant? At this time, seeing her here, Zhang Xiaohua was also happy and quickly went forward to greet her. Chen Chen's eyes were full of stars and her face was red. She shyly cupped her hands and saluted, but she also closed her mouth tightly and did not speak. There was a reason for Chen Chen's reverence. Imagine that night, Chen Chen was also by Chang'e's side and stabbed the old man in black. Chen Chen's long sword also stabbed the old man's body, but it could not penetrate the old man's body. Instead, the old man grabbed the long sword and broke the tip of the sword. Zhang Xiaohua, when everyone was in despair, stepped forward and stabbed the old man's throat with one sword, saving O Yan and everyone else. Although it was dark and Chen Chen could not see it clearly, the fact was that it happened in front of her. How could such a heroic act not arouse the reverence of girls? Chang'e saw this and said with a smile, "Chen Chen, you can speak now." Hearing this, Chen Chen did not immediately chatter like a baby swallow as Chang'e expected. Instead, she closed her mouth and smiled without saying a word. Zhang Xiaohu did not notice this. After seeing Zhang Xiaohua come over and salute Chang'e and Chen Chen, he pulled Zhang Xiaohua and asked, "Xiaohua, when did you become so powerful? Isn't that the boxing skill you put together by yourself? Why don't others dare to fight with you? And what's the footwork you used to dodge?" Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "Second brother, don't you know what I am like? Didn't we also learn from each other last night? But now I am very strong, while they are still young and lack internal force, so they dare not fight with me directly. As for the footwork, you can ask Hero Wen about it later." Chang'e next to them was not happy and said, "Zhang Xiaohua, you are not kind. It's just a footwork. Can't you tell us?" Zhang Xiaohua smiled bitterly and whispered, "Master O doesn't allow me to tell you. You can figure it out by yourselves." Hearing this, Chang'e and Chen Chen immediately stopped smiling and did not dare to ask more. Seeing this, Zhang Xiaohua quickly whispered, "Sister Chang'e, you can ask Hall Master Qin about this when you have a chance. She also knows it." Chang'e and Chen Chen looked at each other and nodded. Zhang Xiaohua then asked, "Sister Chang'e, why did you come so early today? I thought you would come in the afternoon." Chang'e said with a smile, "This year, I'm going to take part in the competition of the 7th rank in plain clothes. The number of female disciples in Mingcue Hall is limited and there are not many competitions. Yesterday, I basically got the points to advance and won another round this morning. I'm sure I can advance, so I asked for leave from Hall Master. Hall Master Qin heard that I was going to watch your competition and readily agreed. You see, Chen Chen also pestered me and insisted on coming." Chen Chen blushed and said, "I just want to see how powerful you are. It was dark last time, so I didn't see clearly." Zhang Xiaohua was amused and asked, "Are you disappointed when you see me today?" Chen Chen was straightforward and said, "Yes, it seems that you can't even defeat me, a 5th-rank commoner." Zhang Xiaohua smiled bitterly and said, "It's true. It was a coincidence that day." "It's true." At this time, Zhang Xiaohu's face was a little abnormal. He thought a lot in his mind, "Chang'e looks younger than me, but now she is already at the 7th rank of commoner clothes. But I haven't practiced the mental cultivation method of internal strength. Even if I practice the first rank of commoner clothes, I am no match for her. Even now, it seems that even my brother can easily defeat me. I don't know when I can catch up with Chang'e and advance to the 7th rank of commoner clothes. I think that when I reach the 7th rank of commoner clothes, Chang'e will have already advanced to brocade clothes. Chang'e saw Zhang Xiaohua and Chen Chen talking happily and couldn't help laughing. Then she noticed that Zhang Xiaohu lowered his head and didn't say anything. She felt strange and asked, "Senior brother, what are you thinking about?" Zhang Xiaohu raised his head and said with a forced smile, "Nothing. I'm just thinking about when I can take part in the martial arts exhibition and when I can advance to the 7th rank of commoner clothes. Junior sister apprentice Chang'e is so young, but her martial arts are much better than mine. I really don't know when I can catch up with you. My title of senior brother sounds really shameful." Chang'e smiled and said, "People have different experiences. If you concentrate on practicing martial arts like us, you won't have the fun of childhood that you just talked about. Since you already have such fun and still want our martial arts, what else do we have to be proud of? We have our differences and pride. This is the real life." Zhang Xiaohu understood and said, "Junior sister apprentice Chang'e said it so well. It's very philosophical." Chang'e chuckled and said, "This is what our hall master Qin said. I just changed it a little. Moreover, now that you've become Martial Uncle Wen's disciple, you should concentrate on practicing martial arts. You'll get something in the future if you work hard." Zhang Xiaohu nodded and said, "You're right. However, I always feel that my martial arts are not as good as yours. You call me senior brother, so I feel uneasy." Chang'e thought for a moment and said, "You're right. In fact, you always call me junior sister apprentice Chang'e. It sounds cumbersome. How about we call each other by their names?" Zhang Xiaohu clapped his hands and said, "That's good. I'll call you Chang'e. When my martial arts are as good as yours, it won't be too late to call you junior sister apprentice." Chang'e smiled and said, "Since you said so, I'll wait for the day when your martial arts catch up with mine." Zhang Xiaohu nodded firmly and said, "There will be such a day. Chang'e, wait for it." While the 4 of them were chatting below the stage, they did not forget about the competition on the stage. Chang'e and Chen Chen had come from the 1st rank of commoners, so they had a unique vision. They would judge every competition and they were very appreciative of these disciples. The male and female disciples of the ethereal sect were taught separately. The young female disciples were also taught in Mingcue Hall, not Kitty Hawk Hall. Usually, Chang'e and the others rarely came to Kitty Hawk Hall, but even so, Chang'e was very optimistic about this batch of disciples. He even thought that he did not have such strength at that time. On the stage, the competition without Zhang Xiaohua was very exciting. The 8 competitions had their own characteristics. Chang'e repeatedly sighed that the new generation was better than the old. She could not compete with them at that time. Soon after noon, it was time for Zhang Xiaohua to go on the stage. This time, Chang'e was present, so there was no need for Zhang Xiaohu to be a human ladder. After discussing with Chang'e, just as Chang'e was about to throw Zhang Xiaohua onto the stage, Leader Chang came over. He stopped Chang'e's action and said to Zhang Xiaohua with a smile, "Number 250, you don't need to ask others to help you anymore. I'll ask someone to bring a ladder. You can go on the stage from the side. It's not good to be thrown here and there like this. If Steward Su sees this, he will definitely blame you." When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she was overjoyed. How could she not use a ladder? Who would like the feeling of being grabbed by the neck and thrown into the sky? So, she hurriedly thanked Leader Chang and went on the stage from the side ladder. Chapter 175. Zhang Xiaohua's opponent in this round seemed to be weaker than the previous rounds. He was also a little younger. In the previous rounds, he had lost more than he drew. He was probably the weakest in this group apart from Zhang Xiaohua. In the eyes of Chang'e and Chen Chen, he should be able to defeat him in a few moves. Unfortunately, The one on the field now was Zhang Xiaohua, not a female disciple of Mingsui Hall. As a result, the same situation as the previous round appeared in the competition on the field. Although the disciple of Kitty Hawk Hall was the weakest, his fist technique, palm technique, and internal force were all remarkable. The most important thing was that his lightness skill was also good. In this situation, Zhang Xiaohua could only sigh. Alas, was this the legendary saying, not weak when encountering the strong and not strong when encountering the weak? Chang'e and Chen Chen had this thought in their hearts at the same time. In this case, no matter what the outcome of the competition on the field was, the result had already been decided. Apart from the time it took to burn a stick of incense, the people in the audience really could not think of any other result. Watching Zhang Xiaohua's fists on the field brutally punching here and there and his opponent using lightness skill to fly around, a phrase suddenly appeared in Chang'e's mind, a cow chewing on a peony. Yes, a cow chewing on a peony. It was Zhang Xiaohua, this cow, chewing on the peony that was the exquisite martial arts of Misty School. The martial arts of Misty School were so wonderful. All kinds of fist techniques, palm techniques, lightness skills, and other martial arts were extraordinary, like a beautiful peony in full bloom. When facing an opponent like Zhang Xiaohua, he did not use the same moves to fight the enemy. Instead, he used his brute force and a set of fist techniques to rush forward and force the opponent to dodge everywhere. When he encountered martial arts that he could not deal with, Zhang Xiaohua only had one word, dodge. After dodging for a while, he immediately used his brute force and fist techniques to continue ravaging his opponent. This kind of barbaric competition was completely different from the competition of the other young Eagle Hall disciples. If the others were competing through the blossoming of beauty, then he was displaying his strength through ravaging and destroying this beauty. Other than a cow chewing on peony, he really couldn't think of a better word to describe Zhang Xiaohua's martial arts competition. However, Zhang Xiaohua, this bull, truly had the strength to be called a bull. The strength of her arms was indescribable. Although there weren't many moves in the Big Dipper magical fist, there were only 108 moves, but in Zhang Xiaohua's hands, the ordinary became magical. Facing the various moves and techniques of the young Eagle Hall's disciples, she countered each move with the same principle and did not fall into a disadvantageous position. In fact, Chang'e and Chen Chen thought too highly of Zhang Xiaohua in their hearts. They had seen Zhang Xiaohua's amazing sword move and naturally thought that Zhang Xiaohua's martial arts were extraordinary, but they chose to forget it. How long had Zhang Xiaohua been practicing martial arts? How long had the disciples of the Misty School's Kitty Hawk Hall been practicing martial arts? How many martial arts resources did Zhang Xiaohua have? How many martial arts resources did the disciples of the Misty School's Kitty Hawk Hall have? None of these could be compared. Because all of these, compared to the tall one and the short one and the big one and the small one in the ring, people couldn't remember. They could only feel that Zhang Xiaohua, who was taller than the others, was bullying the child opposite her. If Zhang Xiaohua won, then it should be, but if she didn't win, then it shouldn't be. Was it necessary to win just because she was older and taller? Of course not. At least, Yu Dei and Shangguan Yun, who were in the same square, weren't like this. Shangguan Yun didn't need to be mentioned. She had lost 3 matches in a row yesterday, and today's 2 matches didn't seem to have improved. As for Yu Dei, she had accumulated 1 point yesterday with 2 draws and 1 loss. She thought that she would be able to rise steadily today, but unexpectedly, she met a strong opponent as soon as she went on the stage. She also lost 2 matches in a row and even lost yesterday's points. At this time, both of them drooped their heads like ostriches and shrank in the middle of a group of children. Today's decadence was the opposite of yesterday's. Yesterday, Shangguan Yun was abnormally decadent. He felt that it was a mistake for him to come here, but after last night's sleepless night, he truly recognized his own shortcomings. Although he had practiced martial arts for a few years in his hometown, he was still a wild fox and hadn't been taught seriously by others. In the Lotus Escort Agency's martial arts training center, although he had been taught seriously, studied seriously, and practiced diligently, it had only been a short time after all. Thus, he deeply understood that his losses were normal. If he won, it would be abnormal instead. He was fully prepared for today's loss. Losing 2 or 3 matches was something he could accept. After all, he couldn't compare to the group of talented children in the Misty School. His talent and resources were lacking. Yesterday, while Uday was decadent, he also had a trace of excitement. After all, it was rare for him to have the opportunity to exchange pointers with a disciple from the Misty School, even if it was a commoner first-ranked disciple. Yesterday's loss was just a moment of carelessness, or he had met an expert first. After a long night of rest, he was prepared to show off his skills today and beat him into a mess. Of course, it was inappropriate to bully the weak, but for the sake of his face, he couldn't care less. However, reality had taught him a solid lesson. Today's opponent was an expert, and yesterday's was just an appetizer. Thus, the greater the expectation, the greater the disappointment. Today's Uday was completely listless. Since Uday and Shang Guanyun had chosen the smaller accounts in the group, the third round of the competition had already begun when Zhang Xiaohua had just finished the second round of the competition. There was still no miracle in the third round. Uday persisted for more than half the round, but in the end, he was forced off the stage by a series of attacks from his opponent. Uday jumped off the stage in a sorry state. Standing on the ground, he turned his head to look at the proud young man on the stage. Obviously, that wasn't his stage. The one who let his hopes soar wasn't him, but the excited young man. Uday composed himself and looked down at the ground under his feet. It seemed that he had really come to the wrong place. As if he had already decided on something, Uday raised his head. His eyes were clear, and on the stage, the other dancers had already shown a new style. Uday was a little reluctant, but he was also determined. He slowly walked to the front of one of the team leaders and whispered something. When the team leader heard it, he didn't show any surprise or abnormality. It was as if Uday's words were within his expectations. After listening to Uday's words, the team leader nodded slightly and raised his head to look at the competition on the stage again. When Uday raised his hand to salute and prepared to leave, the team leader just waved his hand. Uday left. He was very determined to leave this stage that didn't belong to him. When he left the noisy crowd and walked towards the door, he heard someone calling him from behind. When he turned around, he saw that it was Shang Guanyun. Looking at Shang Guanyun's somewhat lonely expression, Uday smiled. He wasn't alone after all. Just like that, the 2 contestants from the Lotus Escort Agency left. They waved their hands and didn't take away any of the clouds that had caught their attention. Presumably, for a long time after this, there wouldn't be anyone from the Lotus Escort Agency coming to participate in the martial arts exhibition. Uday and Shang Guanyun didn't talk about the martial arts exhibition along the way. They also didn't have the mood to pay attention to or discuss the other wild card contestant, Zhang Xiaohua. Presumably, in their hearts, even someone of their level couldn't withstand a single blow. In their eyes, Zhang Xiaohua was like a country bumpkin. What could she do? She would probably be shot down from the sky as soon as she went on stage. The 2 of them only had one thought right now. What was that bastard Yuluan thinking? He actually urged them to participate in some bullshit martial arts exhibition and made them lose face. When they got back, the first person they would deal with would be him. And Yuluan, who was doing his best to flatter 4th Master Wen, was sneezing incessantly. He was very puzzled as he asked himself, last night at the fragrance house, how could he have behaved himself? After all, the silver that Uday tipped him was spent sparingly. Not to mention that the 2 extras of the martial arts exhibition had finally realized that they had completed their mission and forfeited. In the square of Kitty Hawk Hall, the other extras didn't have any awareness of being a supporting character. He was very proud of himself as he bragged about his boxing skills to his sister who worshipped him. In fact, if one were to talk about bragging, Zhang Xiaohua was a bit overboard. She didn't talk much, but she couldn't stand Chen Chen's incessant questioning. Zhang Xiaohua's Big Dipper magical fist was different from the current popular boxing skills, but it was also very similar. Chen Chen had also learned many of the moves. She was very curious as to how this somewhat mysterious young man in her heart could change the 108 moves into such a mess and yet still be so harmonious. Unable to withstand the repeated questioning of this curious baby, Zhang Xiaohua really didn't know how she had pieced it together. She could only deal with it tiredly. Therefore, under Chen Chen's deliberate flattery, Zhang Xiaohua's tail was raised a little. Could it be that she was really a legendary genius? Unlike Chen Chen, who kept talking, Chang'e next to him was silent. It was not that she didn't like to talk, but Chen Chen dominated Zhang Xiaohua, so Chang'e could only talk to Zhang Xiaohu. Chang'e didn't know much about Zhang Xiaohu, so she didn't know where to start. It was the same for Zhang Xiaohu. He knew nothing about Chang'e and couldn't find a topic to talk about, so there was an awkward silence. Both of them were watching the competition on the ring attentively. After watching for a while, Zhang Xiaohu frowned slightly. He leaned to Chang'e and asked, "Junior sister Chang'e, oh, no, Chang'e, can you tell me about the martial arts moves of these two junior brothers on the ring? After all, I just joined the sect and don't know the martial arts of the sect. If I can take this opportunity to learn about the martial arts of our sect, I think it will be beneficial for my future practice." Hearing this, Chang'e smiled slightly. She didn't like this awkward situation. Hearing Zhang Xiaohu's question, she also aroused her desire to be a teacher. She pointed to the contestants on the ring and told Zhang Xiaohu in detail about the moves of each contestant, as well as the advantages and disadvantages of the moves. As a result, Zhang Xiaohu and Zhang Xiaohua enjoyed a memorable perfect afternoon for the first time in history. When the sun was setting in the west, Zhang Xiaohua reluctantly stepped on the ladder again and made a business of trampling on other people's beautiful moves. The result was naturally speechless. The people under the ring were also stupefied as they watched the candles burn out little by little. They had lost interest in watching the competition. What a joke! They had watched 4 such competitions. In the first one, they were still amazed, and in the second one, they could still appreciate it. But they couldn't stand the same few moves again and again. Who would be surprised by it? Even when the two finished competing, the crowd was too lazy to applaud. It wasn't until leader Chang announced that it was a draw that everyone resentfully dispersed. Zhang Xiaohu and the other 3 left fledgling Eagle Hall and walked to the fork in the road. Zhang Xiaohu naturally wanted to invite them to dinner together. In fact, when it came to dinner, it was just going to eat together in the dining hall. There were many disciples in the Misty School, so naturally there were many dining halls. For example, Mingsui Hall and fledgling Eagle Hall all had their own dining halls. As for direct disciples like Zhang Xiaohu, they also had their own dining halls. However, Chang'e didn't give him this opportunity. She only said that it wasn't convenient for them to go to a direct disciples' dining hall. Moreover, he hadn't returned to Mingsui Hall for a day and had to hurry back to see the results of the competition. In short, there were many reasons that rejected Zhang Xiaohu's good intentions. Zhang Xiaohu also didn't force them to stay. Everyone saluted and said goodbye. When Chang'e and Chen Chen were far away, Zhang Xiaohu retracted his gaze. Then he slapped Zhang Xiaohua's shoulder and said with a smile, "Good boy, you actually lied to me yesterday." Zhang Xiaohua was stunned. He touched the shoulder that Zhang Xiaohu had slapped and pretended to be in pain. He grinned and said, "Second brother, how did I lie to you yesterday?" Zhang Xiaohu laughed and said, "You obviously didn't lose a single match yesterday. Why did you tell me that you lost? I comforted you for a long time yesterday and didn't dare to mention the competition. If I had known that you were so strong that you could draw 3 matches in a row in front of our Misty School's disciples, I would have made a big fuss yesterday." Zhang Xiaohua also said with a smile, "I didn't say that I lost. I just said that I didn't win. But that doesn't mean that I lost. A draw doesn't mean that I didn't win, right?" Zhang Xiaohu was stunned and said in his heart, "That's right. A draw doesn't mean that you didn't win. However, the difference between a draw and a loss is too big." Then, Zhang Xiaohua said, "Moreover, I didn't win. This is a fact. It's not too late for you to be happy when I win tomorrow." Zhang Xiaohu didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He wanted to say to him, forget it. You've only practiced martial arts for a few days. How can you compare with them? But he didn't want to dispel his enthusiasm, so he had to say, well, let's see how good you are tomorrow. Don't draw again. Zhang Xiaohua patted his chest and said, second brother, let's see what I can do tomorrow. How could Zhang Xiaohu believe that? It would be strange if there was a second word in addition to the first word tomorrow. After a while, Zhang Xiaohua suddenly said, second brother, tomorrow is the last day of the martial arts exhibition. I guess we'll have to go back to the Huanxi Villa tomorrow night. It's still early today. I want to see Captain He and the others. They must be almost done today. What do you think? Zhang Xiaohu thought about it. Since Chang'e and the others had a lot of time to spend in the Kitty Eagle Hall today, He Tianshu and the others should also be done with the competition. So he nodded and walked in the direction of the pharmacy with Zhang Xiaohua. Zhang Xiaohu naturally didn't know where the pharmacy was, but there was a path right under his nose. After asking around, he found the pharmacy. The location of the pharmacy was very strange. It was actually in the innermost part of the Misty Mountain Villa. It was a long journey from the Kitty Eagle Hall to the pharmacy. Along the way, he encountered many excited disciples. After all, it was a grand event that happened once a year. Many people had gained something. Moreover, many of the squares were dismantled. Presumably, they needed to be cleaned up after the competition. Lanterns and torches were lit in every small courtyard and square. It must be another noisy and orderly night. After walking for a long time according to other people's directions, there were fewer people. Then they came to a row of big blue walls. There was also a vermilion door that was wide open. There were several huge lanterns hanging in front of the door, shining on the golden words on the door, pharmacy. Unlike the Kitty Eagle Hall, there were guards at the door of the pharmacy. The disciples who came in and out of the door had to verify their waist tags. It was still early in the night, and there were many disciples coming in and out. Looking at their habitual expressions, it must be a routine. Zhang Xiaohu brought Zhang Xiaohua to the door. When the guard saw that Zhang Xiaohu looked unfamiliar, he unconsciously became vigilant and went forward to stop them. Zhang Xiaohu did not find it strange and obediently showed his waist tag. Zhang Xiaohua did not have a waist tag and only handed over her martial arts exhibition number. The guard carefully looked at Zhang Xiaohu's waist tag and asked a few detailed questions before returning it. However, after looking at Zhang Xiaohua's number, he shook his head and said, "This little brother, the martial arts exhibition number only shows that you can participate in the competition. It does not show your identity. Do you have a waist tag?" Zhang Xiaohua had an idea and patted her head. Didn't she still have the waist tag of Huanxi Mountain Villa? Since the last time she returned to the villa, Qiu Tong gave her a waist tag and said that in the future, she did not need to take the waist tag from the guard to go out of the Huanxi Mountain Villa. She had long forgotten about it. She had also heard from He Tianshu that she could enter the Misty Mountain Villa with the waist tag of Huanxi Mountain Villa. How could she forget? So she quickly found the waist tag of Huanxi Mountain Villa and handed it over. The guard took it and carefully looked at it. He smiled and said, "Little brother, you are here to participate in the martial arts exhibition at Huanxi Mountain Villa, right?" Zhang Xiaohua quickly nodded and said yes. But the guard still looked regretful and said, "This waist tag of Huanxi Mountain Villa naturally allows you to enter our Misty School. Unfortunately, the pharmacy hall is an important place in the school. Other than the pharmacy hall's disciples and core disciples, others are not allowed to casually enter. Although little brother's waist tag can prove your identity, you can't enter." When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she became anxious and said, "Is the pharmacy hall very important? I just want to see Captain He Tianshu, that's all." The guard still looked helpless and said, "It's not that I don't want to help you. Little brother, we do have this rule. Unless you have a special permission tag issued by our pharmacy hall's elders or above, otherwise, even if He Tianshu comes to pick you up in person, it won't work." Zhang Xiaohua was depressed. She just came to see He Tianshu, Nye Xiaoer, and the others. Why was it so troublesome? Forget it, she'd better go back to her second brother. Please collect it, thank you. Chapter 176. Zhang Xiaohu saw that Zhang Xiaohua was unhappy, so he said to the guard, "Then can I go in?" The guard said, "Of course you can." Zhang Xiaohu said to Zhang Xiaohua, "Xiaohua, wait here for a while. I'll go in and find Captain He." Zhang Xiaohua said, "Forget it, second brother. If you don't let me in, then I won't. Anyway, the martial arts competition will end tomorrow. When I return to the Huanxi Mountain Villa, I'll still be able to see him. I just want to take a look at the pharmacy today. Since you don't let me in, then I'll go back." Zhang Xiaohu knew that his younger brother wanted to go in, and his eyes were full of disappointment. In fact, Zhang Xiaohua was still a teenager. There was nothing interesting about the pharmacy. He came all the way here, but he was rejected at the door. His curiosity grew stronger. Whether he went in or not wasn't a problem. However, Zhang Xiaohu didn't want to disappoint his younger brother. After all, he was also a disciple of the Misty School. In his own territory, he wanted Zhang Xiaohua to have her wish fulfilled. He smiled and patted Zhang Xiaohua's shoulder, saying, "I'll go in and find Captain He. You wait by the door for a moment." Zhang Xiaohua opened her mouth, wanting to stop her second brother. However, Zhang Xiaohu didn't say anything. He turned around and asked the guard where He Tianshu lived. Thus, Zhang Xiaohua could only scratch her head and obediently stand to the side. The guard gave a simple description of the general location. Zhang Xiaohu turned around and nodded at Zhang Xiaohua before entering the door. Zhang Xiaohu went in for a long time, but didn't come out. Zhang Xiaohua was a little bored and wandered around the entrance of the pharmacy. At this time, the sky was already dark. There were even fewer people going in and out of the pharmacy. As Zhang Xiaohua was walking, she happened to see a middle-aged man coming back from afar. He was walking towards the entrance of the pharmacy. With the light from afar, Zhang Xiaohua found that person familiar. However, she couldn't remember who he was. She didn't care. She only knew a few people in the Misty School. Perhaps she was mistaken. That person also noticed Zhang Xiaohua. Think about it, in front of the empty door, there was only a teenager strolling around. It was impossible not to notice him. The person just glanced at him at first and didn't care. He continued to walk forward. However, after a few steps, he seemed to think of something. He stared at Zhang Xiaohua for a while and frowned slightly. At this time, Zhang Xiaohua didn't notice this. She had already turned around and strolled in another direction. That person was slightly annoyed when he saw that Zhang Xiaohua didn't come forward to greet him. When he walked to the entrance, he pulled a long face and scolded the guard, "How do you do things? How can you let an outsider stroll around the door?" An outsider? The guard was a little surprised. He quickly looked out and saw a lonely figure strolling outside. The guard smiled apologetically and said, "Deacon Chang, that teenager isn't a disciple of our Misty School, but he's not an outsider either. He's from the Huanxi Manor. He's not an outsider." It would have been fine if he did not hear those words. However, upon hearing those words, that attendant Chang grew even more furious. He loudly berated, "What? Who told you that the people from the Huanxi Manor aren't outsiders? Don't tell me that the people from the Huanxi Manor are disciples of the Misty School?" The guard was very surprised. He didn't know if there was anything wrong with what he said. He had received instructions that the Huanxi Manor's token could allow him to enter the Misty Manor, but not the pharmacy. Besides, what's wrong with that teenager strolling in front of your pharmacy? Don't tell me he's trying to rape you. Even if he's trying to rape you, he hasn't done it yet. What right do you have to drive him away? However, the guard still said cautiously, "Deacon Chang, this one doesn't care if the people from the Huanxi Manor are from the Misty School. This one's duty is to guard this door. Any outsider who doesn't meet the rules can't be allowed to enter." As for whether there are people strolling around or fighting outside the door, it has nothing to do with this one. At this time, Zhang Xiaohua also strolled to the door again. Seeing the middle-aged man arguing with the guard, she was very curious and came over. Deacon Chang was annoyed that he had been rebuffed. He raised his voice and said, "What? How dare you talk to me like that? You! The guard was also angry. He took a step closer and said, "What about me? Deacon Chang." Hearing the words, Deacon Chang, Zhang Xiaohua's mind lit up. She immediately remembered. Wasn't this middle-aged man one of the people who came to the Huanxi Manor to inspect the medicine fields last year? Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but feel happy. She walked forward with a smile on her face and saluted, "Marshal Uncle Chang, how are you? Do you still remember me?" Deacon Chang had nowhere to vent his anger. Although the guard was only a gatekeeper, he wasn't under the management of the pharmacy. Even if his position was higher than his, he didn't have the authority to give orders. Now that he was humiliated by the guard, he could only swallow his anger. This Zhang Xiaohua just happened to come over and hit the muzzle. Deacon Chang fiercely glared at Zhang Xiaohua. He spat out a mouthful of thick phlegm and said, "Who is your martial uncle? Why don't you take a good look in the mirror? Do you have the qualifications to be my nephew? Why didn't you stay in the Huanxi Manor to look after the fields? Why did you come to our misty school? Don't you know if this is the place you should come?" After saying that, he flicked his sleeves and turned to go in. Seeing this, the guard shouted, "Deacon Chang, how can you be so unethical? Didn't sect leader O always advocate the slogan of cleanliness and hygiene? How can you spit everywhere? Be careful or I'll punish you." Deacon Chang, who had walked far away, paused for a moment. He didn't stop and walked straight away. In front of the gate, only Zhang Xiaohua was left standing there alone. Tears were rolling in her eyes and almost flowed down. She really didn't know how she had offended this so-called martial uncle. She had only seen him once in the Huanxi Manor. This was only the second time. She just came to greet him. How could he treat her like this? Could it be that this was the legendary hot face stuck to a cold butt? Seeing Zhang Xiaohua's appearance, the guard didn't know how to comfort her. Today, Deacon Chang was also strange. He wasn't like this on a normal day. Why did he dislike this young man so much? However, the dispute between her and Deacon Chang today was also caused by this young man. Indeed, there were secrets that she didn't know. Putting aside the fact that Zhang Xiaohua was bullied for the time being, when Zhang Xiaohu walked through the gate of the pharmacy hall, the gate of the pharmacy hall wasn't like the Young Eagle Hall. After entering, there was a large square. Instead, there was a screen wall with a large number of flowers, birds, insects, and fish carved on it. After turning around the screen wall, there was also a large area. There were many ancient trees that couldn't be hugged by one person. In the dark night, the wind blew and the leaves rustled. The gap between the ancient trees was very wide and there was a flat road to pass through. Zhang Xiaohu walked inside according to the guard's instructions. After walking for a while, it was even quieter inside. In the dark night, he could vaguely see the shadow of the mountain peak. Zhang Xiaohu suddenly understood. No wonder he had walked so far. The pharmacy hall was actually on the mountain peak behind the manor. At this time, someone happened to come over in front. Zhang Xiaohu confirmed He Tianxu's position again. When the person heard that he was looking for He Tianxu, he smiled and said, "It's not appropriate to look for him in his room at this time. He passed the competition today and is in the training room." When Zhang Xiaohu heard this, he quickly inquired about the location of the training room. The person thought for a while and said, "The training room is still some distance from here. Our pharmacy hall is built on the mountain. The path is not easy to find. I'll take you there." When Zhang Xiaohu heard this, he thanked him again and again. Sure enough, the training room was not close to this place. There were many twists and turns, and he had walked quite a distance. Moreover, the key point was that the pharmacy built on the mountain was not flat. If Zhang Xiaohu had walked on his own, it would have been really difficult to find it. Along the way, the two people chatted casually. Zhang Xiaohu couldn't help but ask curiously, "It's already so late. Why is He Tianshu still in the training room?" The person smiled and said, "It's all because of the martial arts competition. This He Tianshu hasn't advanced for several years, and he didn't mix well in the pharmacy hall. That was why he was sent to Huanxi Manor to look after the medicinal field. Who knows where he learned the ethereal steps? This time, he actually passed 2 stages in a row. In the morning, he actually beat Chang Biao down from the arena. Chang Biao entered the Misty School with He Tianshu. The two of them have always been competing openly and secretly. He Tianshu has never gained the upper hand. Chang Biao is already a deacon, but He Tianshu is only a captain. As a matter of fact, He Tianshu won the competition today. Many dissatisfied senior and junior brothers dragged him to the training room, wanting to have a good spar with him. Ethereal steps? Zhang Xiaohu's heart skipped a beat. Could it be that the extremely useful movement technique that Zhang Xiaohua used during the day was the ethereal steps? It must be so. His younger brother was with He Tianshu all day. He Tianshu probably imparted it to him. Sure enough, when they arrived at the training room, the usually quiet training room was still bustling with people. He Tianshu's somewhat arrogant and hearty laughter could be heard from inside. It seemed that this guy had won a lot of people today. The two of them entered and saw many people standing in the open space of the training room. There were 2 people in the field, and the winner had already been decided. One was He Tianshu, and the other was a slightly younger man. That man was climbing up from the ground and scolded with a smile, "Old He, I told you to be a little merciful. Why did you still kick me down?" He Tianshu smiled and said, "Forget it. Didn't I just learn it? I can't control my body. Besides, you usually throw me to the ground many times. Today, I'm just taking a little revenge." That person clicked his tongue and praised, "This ethereal steps is indeed miraculous. Previously, you weren't my match, but now, I'm not your match. A scholar who has been away for 3 days must be looked at with new eyes. It's exactly to describe you." He Tianshu cupped his hands and said, "It's just a so-so. I'm still a beginner. I'm far from being a direct disciple." Just as they were talking, they saw Zhang Xiaohu follow that person in. He Tianshu couldn't help but be stunned. He hurriedly walked out of the field and asked in surprise, "Zhang Xiaohu, are you here to look for me?" Zhang Xiaohu bowed and said, "Yes, Captain He. I brought Xiaohua to see you." "Zhang Xiaohua? Where is he?" He Tianshu looked behind him. Zhang Xiaohu said, "There's no need to look. He can't come in. He's still waiting for you at the entrance." Only then did He Tianshu come to a realization. He patted his forehead and turned back and said, "Brothers, I have a friend here. Let's end it here for today. Let's spar again in the future." When everyone heard this, they dispersed in an uproar. Zhang Xiaohu smiled and said to He Tianshu, "Captain He, you're feeling proud." He Tianshu said embarrassedly, "It's nothing. It's just that they saw me win against Senior Chang in the morning and found it strange. That's why they insisted on sparring with me. I had no choice." Zhang Xiaohu said, "Let's go out quickly. I'm sure Xiaohua is waiting anxiously at the entrance." When He Tianshu heard this, he hurriedly followed him out. When they reached the corner, he suddenly stopped and said, "If I go over like this, I'll only see Zhang Xiaohua once. He can't come in. Come on, you might as well come with me to the hall master and ask for a waste token so that Zhang Xiaohua can come in and see our pharmacy hall." When Zhang Xiaohu heard this, he hesitated and said, "Won't it take too long? Xiaohua has been waiting outside for a long time." He Tianshu tugged on his sleeve and said, "Let's go. I know this little brother of yours well. He just wanted to take a look at the pharmacy hall and see how we grow herbs. Otherwise, why would he think of coming to see me? Moreover, the martial arts exhibition is only a few days away. Won't he still be able to see me when he returns to Huanxi Manor? Zhang Xiaohu chuckled and didn't answer. He followed He Tianshu in another direction. After walking for a while, they came to a rather large courtyard. There were also disciples guarding the door. He Tianshu went forward and asked in a low voice, "Is the hall master inside?" The disciple hurriedly saluted and said, "Martial uncle He, the hall master is inside. There are also elders." "That's right, Martial uncle Chang also just went in." As he said this, the corners of his mouth curled up into a smile. He Tianshu slapped him on the head and said, "You little brat, what's so funny? Don't talk about flowers behind us." The disciple touched his head and said, "Martial uncle He, I didn't say anything. Anyway, you had a great time winning this morning. We were all happy for you." He Tianshu said, "You bunch of brats who only want to see the world in chaos." Although his tone was a little angry, there was some happiness on his face. After saying this, he led Zhang Xiaohu into the courtyard. Before He Tianshu and Zhang Xiaohu could enter the hall, they heard Deacon Chang's voice from the hall, "Hall master, am I right? Who is that Zhang Xiaohua? He's just a servant from the Huanxi Manor. How can he sneak into our misty school with the Huanxi Manor's token? He's even strolling around the entrance of our pharmacy hall. What is he doing? Why does he have to come to our pharmacy hall of all places? Does he have any ulterior motives? Our pharmacy hall is an important place in the sect. If he steals something out, we won't be able to explain it to the higher-ups. I saw him sneaking around the entrance and wanted the guards to drive him away, but the guards actually spoke up for him. Don't you think this is a classic example of collusion? Hall master, you have to be careful. Quickly replace that guard." When Zhang Xiaohu heard this, anger rose from his heart. Who is this Chang in the hall? How dare he talk about my brother like this? He couldn't help but quicken his pace. Seeing this, He Tianshu quickly pulled his sleeve and whispered, "Don't worry, listen to me." Zhang Xiaohu looked at He Tianshu, who was also angry, and could only nod his head. He Tianshu led Zhang Xiaohu to the entrance of the hall. He didn't break in, but stood there quietly. Hall Master Bai of the pharmacy hall was sitting on a chair in the hall, slowly sipping tea. Beside him was Elder He, whose hair and beard were all white. Deacon Chang was standing in the middle of the hall, gesticulating as he spoke. Deacon Chang said again, "This Zhang Xiaohua has been with He Tianshu in Huanxi Mountain Villa. I don't know what they are doing, but even the seeds of the herbs won't germinate. He Tianshu seems to be very protective of this manservant. He even wants to let him read the books in the pharmacy hall. Why doesn't he think that a manservant actually wants to enter the pharmacy hall through a side door? Why doesn't he look at his own virtue?" Hall Master Bai looked up and saw He Tianshu. He put down his teacup and said with a smile, "He Tianshu, why are you free to come here? Weren't you surrounded by that group of boys to compare notes?" Deacon Chang heard this and quickly stopped talking. When he looked back, he saw He Tianshu and Zhang Xiaohu staring at him fiercely. He couldn't help but feel a little uncomfortable and murmured, "He Tianshu, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about the manservant in Huanxi Mountain Villa." He Tianshu ignored him and went forward to greet Hall Master Bai and Elder He. Zhang Xiaohu behind him also hurried forward and said, "Junior Zhang Xiaohu greets Hall Master Bai and Elder He." In fact, Zhang Xiaohu didn't know how to address the two people in the hall, so he could only call them juniors. Hall Master Bai had seen Zhang Xiaohu in the hall when he entered the Misty School and knew that he was Wen Wenhai's disciple. Elder He also saw Zhang Xiaohu at the apprenticeship ceremony later and knew of his identity. Therefore, he didn't dare to slight him. He bowed slightly and let Zhang Xiaohu sit on the chair below. Hearing Zhang Xiaohu's name, Deacon Chang's heart thumped. He thought to himself, does this Zhang Xiaohu have something to do with Zhang Xiaohua? However, he immediately thought, the pharmacy hall can't be entered by non-pharmacy disciples and core disciples. This person isn't from the pharmacy hall, so he's naturally a core disciple. Since he's a core disciple, he won't have anything to do with a manservant in Huanxi Mountain Villa. He immediately relaxed. He Tianshu stood next to Chang Biao and ignored him. He only said to Hall Master Hall Master, a friend of mine wants to visit the pharmacy hall. You've seen this person before. It's Zhang Xiaohua from Huanxi Mountain Villa. Can you give him a waist token and let him in? Chang Biao heard this and immediately objected, Junior brother this Zhang Xiaohua is just a manservant in Huanxi Mountain Villa. Although he's very close to you in the villa, our pharmacy hall is an important place in the sect. How can we just let him in? If something happens, can you bear the responsibility? He Tianshu looked at him with a smile and said, Senior brother Chang, let's not talk about Zhang Xiaohua's identity first. Regardless of whether he's a manservant in Huanxi Mountain Villa or not, I just want to ask, on what basis do you think he has ulterior motives and wants to come to the pharmacy hall to steal chickens and dogs for a living?